Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the program. My name is Jeff Gerstmann. This is the Jeff Gerstmann Show, and I will be your host as we navigate the week that was in the world of video games. The news section bulked up big. Well, I don't know. It's like different reports on kind of the same story in some cases. So, you know. But yeah, let's we're in this springtime situation where we're kind, you know, there's maybe not like a billion games coming out, but we're starting to plan for summertime stuff, seeing unreleased video games and so on and so forth. So that's kind of where I've been at. Did a little network, I had to replace a switch on my network. And so I did that, and I realized that I had more devices plugged into that switch than I thought when I bought a new switch, and it only had room for 4 port. It was like a 5-port switch. So, you know, one goes to your router, and then the devices go in the other ones. And I was like, oh, this used to have 6, if not 7 devices plugged into it, and now I can only plug in 4. So I had to reroute some cables and make some moves, but whatever. It was fine. Except the kids I was down here under. It's all under here behind me, behind the television. And as I'm down there doing it, of course, the kids are trying to jump on my lap and jump on my back and all this stuff. And I'm like, nothing ever gets done. But I eventually got it all wired up. And I don't know. It seems like a smidge faster. I don't know. The other switch was just like it fixed the problem and seems to be higher quality. So that's nice. It's they make them. It's 10 gigabits. I don't have any network cards that are, you know, the connection from the switch to my router is a nice 10 gigabit connection, and I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. But every device plugged into it is a gigabit max. So then I was like, well, what if I bought a network card and then I did this, you know? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. You start running down all of the weird other rabbit holes you could go when it comes to spending money on computers. Someone asked if we'd played the Princess Peach game yet. I have been thinking about the Princess Peach game a lot and watching video of it in action, and you know, I'll get my hands on it and I'll play some of it at some point here, I think. But like, it's been, so my daughter will grab I bought my wife a Switch years ago, and she doesn't have time to touch it anymore. And so my daughter just kind of, it became hers. It became very sticky and dirty, and it's very, like, I gotta say, you know, everyone always talks about how reliable Nintendo's hardware is and how well it does and everything, but it, you know, like watching a 4-year-old treat a Switch unkindly and then get into fights about it with a 2-year-old. You're like, okay, yeah, no, that's this thing still works. That's good. It's all gummed up. At least the screen, you know, because it's a touch screen, so it's just like my daughter is eating cheesy puffs and using the Switch, and it you know, there's a whole it's a mess. It's the stuff that I look at and go like, I just have to let go of that. To be like, that Switch is going to be messy, and anything I want to keep nice, I have to make sure that it stays away from them. Otherwise, I'll be cleaning it up all the time. And so my daughter, you know, that's how she got into Mario Kart. So she started playing a lot of Mario Kart 8. Lately, she's been back on Mario Kart 7 on the 3DS. I don't know why. She says it has more tracks. I'm like, okay, sure. Anyway, when she's not playing Mario Kart, she finds her way into the news section on the Switch, and she starts watching trailers for upcoming games. And so she's been very aware about this Princess Peach thing. And it's been a worry of mine. Because she can play Mario Kart 8 because, like, steering is easy. It's a left and right thing. And also the game has, like, a high level of assistance that you can turn on to where the game will accelerate and steer for you. You don't really need to hold down a button all the time. I mean, if you want to win, you do, but you know, like it'll keep you pointed in the right direction, and that's allowed her to have a really good time with it. I'm like, wow, this is like super smart. This is super smart of them to do this. This works out really well. But like when it comes to side scrollers and stuff like that, she and it's been a while since I had her try to play Pac-Man, because I'm trying to get her just like, hey, this is up, this is down, you know, like she knows up, down, left, and right on her hands, but when it comes to a D-pad, it doesn't quite work out. She can also, I mean, the Roku remote has a D-pad, and she is scary good with that in a way that like I just, you know, I don't know what YouTube videos are going to be on when I walk out there. Like it's bad. But she's, you know, she can navigate all of that stuff. But when it comes to doing that stuff in a timely fashion, doing that stuff, doing it at the same time, that's where it's kind of fallen apart. And so, you know, when it comes to like running and jumping, basically, when it comes to, hey, I got to jump up on this onto this ledge, that's where she can't quite put it together yet. And so, you know, I need to work with her on that stuff for sure. But she's not there yet. And so she's going to want to play this game. And I know it's going to like make her really sad to play it. And it's a weird situation where it's like, oh, this seems like it would be a really perfect game for her right now. But, you know, like looking at even the light dexterity, like, you know, looking at like, here's Princess Peach dressed up like a ninja doing a wall run. And I'm like, yeah, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to, she's just not going to, she's not capable of doing that right now. And so she watches these trailers. She doesn't know the game is out yet, but the last trailer said the date. She just, you know, she said, it's out March 21st, you know, but, you know, she doesn't know what date it is and all that sort of stuff. So I'm kind of holding off on it a little bit. And I'm trying to figure out like what would be a good game to get her to just like pick up the basics of pushing left or right and then occasionally jumping up onto a ledge and all of that stuff. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to do. The other thing I realized, that I have a new reason to really hate Zelda, like basically a lot of Nintendo games, a lot of games in general, but a lot of first party Nintendo games, because they don't have fucking speech. And my daughter cannot read. And so it's like this thing that's like, if these characters spoke, she would immediately understand everything that was happening. And these games would become, so many more games would be playable to her if the characters spoke. But they don't. And so instead they go, bah, 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 and then, you know, it's a bunch of text. And like, she's getting there, you know, with 3-letter words, 4-letter words. She's 4, you know, it's not, you know, she's getting better all the time, but she's not a reader. So it was this other frustrating thing of just like, oh man, like, yeah, like that's because they're trying to make these games for young audiences and all that other stuff too. It's like, you could do this and it would also kind of solve a problem and whatever else. But like, whatever, I'm not trying to like rush her into games either. This is like, it's kind of driven by her. Believe me, the last thing I want to do is like, you know, force video games on any of these kids. If they are interested, they're interested, you know, and that's kind of it. But yeah, she'll be reading more and more soon. She's getting there. But like, you know, so she also likes to play Animal Crossing on the 3DS. So since we pulled the 3DS out so she could play old Mario Kart, she eventually got into Animal Crossing again. And she just wants to get her hair cut over and over again. And I think what I'm going to have to do is, because she is perpetually out of money. She just has no financial sense. And she wants to style her hair over and over again. It's 3,000 bells to get a haircut in that game. That's not nothing, man. That's like, you know, you're doing fossils for 7,000 bells, and then you're getting 2 haircuts and a cup of coffee, and you're like, well, shit. So, I think what I might do is I might hack a 3DS specifically to then visit her town, which was my wife's town, because that was her 3DS that she no longer has any time to use. And just like drop off, like, you know, just one night while everyone else is asleep. I might just be up here just like transferring millions of bells from one system to another or something like that. I don't know. And so she can get all the haircuts she needs to get. I don't know. So it's because instead, like, it's like, okay, yeah, no, oh, well, you can't put your shovel away because your pockets are full. And so what we need to do is we need to run up across the train tracks, and we need to go to the store. And first you need to go to the owl, and you need to get your fossils identified, and then, you know, she'll say, like, I don't, you know, so I'm navigating. So she'll run over so I can navigate the menus for her and read it out to her and say, this is what the owl wants to do. And now run over to the store. And she's like, I accidentally ran into the place where they sell houses. What do I do? I said, just leave. You don't want to talk to that guy. You do not want to talk to that guy. Then she sells her stuff and then immediately blows it on haircuts and coffee. They'll only sell you 1 cup of coffee in that game, which I think is probably the right message to send. Meanwhile, I have been playing a little bit of Tekken 8. Eddy Gordo is in the game now. Kind of weird that he wasn't before. In the pantheon of characters that you would think of as like launch lineup Tekken characters, I feel like Eddy Gordo is on that list. But he is in the game now. I suppose it is like if you bought the expensive version of the game or whatever it is, it's like a 72-hour early access before they'll let you just go buy Eddy Gordo. I don't know. Eddy Gordo is cool. Eddy Gordo has always been cool. He feels like Eddy Gordo. It seemed like the thing about Eddy Gordo was really like, hey, you know, you eventually kind of pick up the motions. You read the animations on that, and he becomes way less powerful. That, like, you know, new players could get in there with Eddy Gordo and really tear it up against other new players, because all they had to really do was mash the kick buttons, and Eddy would just do stuff. But yeah, you eventually kind of learn the basics of those mashing combos and figure it out. So, you know, higher level Eddy Gordo play, I'm sure, is a crazier mix-up kind of situation. But I was playing, so when it all came down yesterday and downloaded the patch and everything, I fired it up, and the servers were down for maintenance, so I wasn't able to like get online and do anything against people. But, you know, I got in there and did some arcade mode and ghost battle and stuff, and I was like, yep, that's Eddy Gordo. Cool, great. I want to spend more time playing Tekken 8, I thought. People are mad at Tekken 8. People are mad at video games, you know, all the time now. But Tekken 8 is now on the list, I suppose, because it doesn't have a Waffle House stage. No, people are, you know, there's some people really mad about the microtransaction aspect of Tekken 8. That stuff ended up getting added after the fact, and now they are adding a battle pass, I suppose, with this patch as well. They're calling it a fight pass. And you can complete missions to unlock various items, according to what they said in their stream about it. I don't know. You know, I'm reading over, like, there's been a few news stories about it and stuff, and, you know, Video Games Chronicle has a good kind of wrap up of it. You know, and it's like, here's people complaining about it on Reddit and saying a free-to-play model in a full-price game is beyond scummy. I personally purchased or pre-ordered the Ultimate Edition believing I would get all the DLC content with the Season Pass. They were dishonest and lied. I don't know. the thing that they probably didn't do is they were not upfront about how that stuff was going to work. And so there were probably some people that didn't think it was going to have a battle pass. Because Street Fighter 6 has a battle pass, and like they've had a billion of them. Like it feels like they're rotating through those passes in like a heartbeat. I don't know. It feels like that it was obvious that they were going to monetize differently with Tekken 8 even prior to release. So I don't know, man. It's so you read some of these quotes and they're just like they feel so out of step with how all video games are nowadays, and that's kind of the that's kind of a weird hill to die on in 2024, I suppose. But I don't know. I think about it in terms of like, what are you gonna do differently? And I don't mean that in like a standoffish, like, what the fuck you gonna do? But like realistically, and this is similar. This kind of goes hand in hand with what we were talking about last week with a lot of the kernel level anti-cheat stuff. And boycotts and things of that nature, kind of consumer action around the way video games are monetized or protected, or whatever aspect of it is making you the angriest this week, I suppose. Like, what's the plan, right? I don't think boycotts stick. We've seen, like weird attempts at that time and time again. Obviously back to old Modern Warfare 2, that was the big one or whatever, but like, don't pre-order a game. Don't pre-order games. Like that was always the one that was the one that I always kind of advocated for, was like, don't pre-order video games. Read and find out if it's actually good or not. And though in some cases, if you are particularly set off by the idea of microtransactions and battle passes and stuff like that, then launch day reviews are not necessarily going to do you any good, because they waited until season 1 to roll out this stuff. And so I guess like ultimately a lot of it comes down to, what do you what will you do about this? What is the if you complaining about it online while the game is doing great numbers, and while they see so ultimately it comes down to like, are a lot of people just fine with this, which seems like it is generally the case, with a lot of other like the Dragon's Dogma stuff we talked about last week, where it was just like, hey, yeah, this is Capcom has done this with their single player games. I was reminded that like achievement rates, like people don't play the games they buy a lot of the time, and when you go look at achievement rates for finishing a game and all of that, like people don't finish their games, and so that kind of like seeing those stats back in the day, like this was kind of like in the Mass Effect 2 or 3 era, was really like wrapping my head around just how few people, like how many people buy games and don't finish them, or don't, in some cases, don't even get to, like, you go look at the achievements for like, here's the first major plot point in the game. It's 10 hours in, it's 5 hours in, whatever it is. And seeing that like, oh, they don't have that shit. I look at that stuff and go like, well, if there are people out there that have more money than time, and they want to have a good, quick experience with the game, and that's it. Kind of changed a lot of the ways I thought about like easy modes, and even some of these like kind of time saver, quote unquote, microtransactions. Where it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. Like sometimes like people just don't fucking have time for this shit, and if those people want to like get extra money to spend in the thing, like I'm like, yeah, I get it. Sure, I guess. Like I don't want to do that. But if people want to do that, that doesn't hurt me any. You have to kind of look at it in terms of the games themselves, I think, and you have to look at it in a game by game basis to a certain extent, because you have to think like, okay, did the transactions they offered in this game result in them balancing the game in favor of you needing to buy them? That's the actual problem. That would be the actual problem. If it was like, hey, like they sell these things in Dragon's Dogma 2, also the grind rate for getting this stuff is insane, then you'd be like, well, okay, now they're like, you see these things and go like, okay, they're kind of pushing people into these microtransactions because the rate of accrual on these currencies is unreasonable. And that is where people are at with the Suicide Squad stuff right now, where Suicide Squad Season 1 started, and you can buy the Joker, I guess. But you can also grind the Joker out, if you know what I'm saying. But the amount of missions, the number of things you would have to do, well, I mean, one of them is play Suicide Squad, which is maybe already a bridge too far. But assuming you're willing to do that, then the number of missions they want you to do and the things they want you to do to get to the Joker on the Battle Pass are actually like, it's way too much for what you get, in a way that people are saying like, clearly they want you to spend the money. Clearly they don't want you to do this. Like, that's a problem. But the mere offering of that stuff, it doesn't offend me at this point. I think because there are so many different types of people playing games. For me, the one that was always ridiculous was the easy fatality thing in Mortal Kombat, where you could buy tokens that would let you just hit a button to do a fatality instead of knowing the motions. And it was just like, ugh. Because of what fatalities represented in the Mortal Kombat franchise early on and the way they are meant to be secret, that one was always one for me that I was just like, this one just sucks because that stuff's not even hard to do per se. Or I guess I would say, if that stuff is really hard for you to do, I imagine a lot of that video game is probably pretty hard for you to do. And why are you having a good time with it? Maybe, I don't, so that one was always really weird for me. But like the, Resident Evil 4 on modern platforms has all those like unlockable, like, here's a weapon, go present this for a free weapon upgrade at the shop or whatever, like, that you can buy. And Dragon's Dogma 2 has, similar, hey, unlock the more currency that you can use to buy pawns, even though you never really need to do that if you're playing the video game. They will let you do that, and then you could hire a higher level pawn that would maybe, make the game slightly easier for you or something like that. I don't know. Like, at some point, it's like that stuff to me seems dumb because I play games to play games. In a general sense, generally speaking, I play the video games because that's the part that's the good. I'm not gonna let me skip to the next cutscene so I can see these awesome, like that's not why I'm here. But I think the thing is, I think people need to figure out kind of where their line is and if they're willing to stick to it and what they're willing to put up with, because I think when you look at where the video game industry is at these days with this stuff, they're rolling full steam ahead. And I don't think there's enough players out there that are in the fight, so to speak, to result in some kind of large boycott or whatever, So I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how you stop this. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be stopped across the board. I think that there are some games where you have egregious situations and you go like, okay, clearly you have turned the dial too far in the direction of microtransactions. You have some games that are, happy medium, not turning it far enough. And then you've got that are on the cosmetic setting where it's just like, like, buy it or don't. I think it's fun to play as Snoop Dogg in Call of Duty. And to me, that is something resembling money well spent in the grand scheme of post-purchase transactions. I'm like, yeah, sure. Why not? But at the end of the day, you know, that they're going to keep doing that stuff unless something changes and it becomes bad business for them to do it. So are you willing to stop playing video games? Are you willing to say, well, I'm just not going to play that game, period? And some of the conversation around the kernel level anti-cheat were people saying that they're like, I'm just not going to play that game. I'm like, okay. Or rather, I'm going to play that game on consoles because the kernel level anti-cheat stuff is not a factor there. You know, so those games are games we play on consoles, and so blah, blah, blah. And how many people are willing to, sign up for that quest and say like, okay, yeah, we're all uninstalling Valorant. That didn't happen. When people were mad about Valorant back when that stuff happened, that stuff just didn't occur. So what is it? And I don't have an answer. Like, this isn't me like leading some rallying charge to be like, we're going to take it to, it's like, this is how big budget video games work these days. This is how they go, like they're already selling versions of the game for $100 in some cases. How much was the expensive version of fucking Suicide Squad? Not to keep dogpiling on that. But yeah, we have games that have gone from 60 to 70. People were very mad when games went from 50 to 60 in the Xbox 360 era. And they got past it. The 3 days early thing for the expensive version of the game seems to be that seems like it's working reasonably well. I don't know. They're playing off of people's fear of missing out and such to try to like, oh, we gotta all hit Suicide Squad as early as we can. We need that 72 hours so we can level up hella. So I don't know. I look at it all as like factors of the modern video game industry. The expensive version of these games often gets you their season pass on top of it, and they don't necessarily charge extra on top of that. It is just, hey, it's the game plus the season pass costs this. If you buy it all up front, you'll get maybe some additional little things. Gold Liu Kang or something, whatever it is. And so they get you for the year, basically. And I'm sure that, in games where they're selling costumes or selling other stuff, they would love for you to buy that version of the game and then go, well, I'm going to play it all year long. I should buy some skins because I'm here. And I'm sure they would love to do that. So yeah, I'm a little bit at a loss around some of this stuff because I think a lot of this kind of falls into, is the video game industry growing or not? Is it reaching new consumers? Is it like all of this stuff? This is some of the stuff that Phil Spencer had to say in an interview with Polygon during GDC that we'll get into a little bit in the news. But like, I think a lot of it is a factor of just like, because big budget games are a bigger risk than ever, they want to try to get as much money out of people as they can because of how risky those games are viewed. Or how like, hey, we can't afford to fail with this one, so let's pull out all the stops and try to make money wherever we can because we just went and spent $200 million on a game, $150 million on a game, whatever it is. And so the tendency, not every game does this clearly, but like the tendency is for a lot of that stuff to leak into a game in service of like, well, we're spending so much money. We got to find ways to make this thing profitable. Otherwise, we're never going to make one of these ever again. That's not a great place to be either. But in a situation where more and more games are feeling like things that are meant to be played for a year and not for 12 hours, where they're like, oh, we got more stuff coming and you already paid for it, so make sure you come back when Akuma comes out. And I'm like, oh right, Akuma, yeah, shit, I guess I should mess with that. And And hey, by the way, we're selling Ninja Turtle outfits or, whatever along the way. That sort of stuff is a factor of, because these games are meant to be played for hundreds of hours in a lot of cases, they need to monetize because they're running servers, because they have ongoing costs, because they have ongoing development, because they have ongoing this and that. And so that is then in service of making games a live service, because then you're like, well, yeah, we're already doing all these updates. Let's keep doing all these updates. And hopefully it'll stick around and we can make money off of people for years to come. Right? I mean, that's the long and the short of it. The idea of a massive budget game that you finish in 12 hours, the AAA games of yore, the stuff that, I miss a fair amount of that stuff these days. When we talk about like Xbox and where Xbox went wrong, like I'm less certain of where Xbox went wrong exactly. Or rather, it used to feel like, oh man, they just need a really great Halo, and where's their big franchises? But like, are those games going to get it done anymore? Are the kind of Spider-Man 2 conversation around like how much that game supposedly cost to develop and how many sales they have to make to break even and all of that. Like, the economics of video games are broken. And the things you're seeing in games in terms of microtransactions where maybe they weren't before, and battle passes where maybe they weren't before, are largely a factor of that, and it is the opposite of a virtuous cycle, is what that feels like in a lot of ways, because you do have people that are going to be turned off by the kind of nickel and diming monetization. And so, are you bringing in enough new players to offset the players who are like throwing up their hands and being like, ugh, enough? Like, even if that's a relatively small percentage of things, you used to be able to count on those players to be there for big console releases and blah, 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 and if they're aging out and they're just like, well, whatever, like the things I would need to do to keep up with gaming these days are ridiculous, or actually more likely than that, they're locking in. They're locking into the one game they play with their friends, and then that game gets used up, and maybe they eventually move on to the next one, but they're playing way fewer games than they used to. Right? You have people that are just like, well, me and my crew, we play Helldivers, and that's it. Every, 3 nights a week, we get together and we play Helldivers. We used to play Rocket League, but now we play Helldivers. When we're done with Helldivers, maybe we'll go back to play more Rocket League. And this locking in process, I think, is something that is happening at younger and younger ages as well. And it's kind of the long-term fear of Minecraft is the way I like to think about it, because Minecraft was the first game that I heard of in that context. I've told the story before where, talking to game developers when Minecraft got really big and was getting all these updates, people were like, what the fuck am I supposed to make? Like, what video game am I supposed to make in a world where all of these people are just coming in and just playing Minecraft? Like, what am I going to, do I have to compete against Minecraft now? Because I'm 3 people spread in, 2 different countries. We're making a small team game. Like, what am I supposed to do to even attract like any sort of players whatsoever? Or like, hey, I'm a mid-sized studio that used to make these big kind of AA sized games. What am I supposed to do in a world where everyone just plays Minecraft? And then you have Roblox come along, and then you have Fortnite come along. And so you have this younger generation of players that are more than likely just playing one of those 3 games. Or, maybe 2 or 3 of those types of games. So what are you supposed to, we talk about why the Epic Game Store kind of seems like it doesn't matter, right? Or how every time they're in court, they're like, yeah, that thing's losing money, man. Whew. They went ahead and built a store. Like, Fortnite got successful, and then they bolted a whole store onto it, and they got all these games. It's serviceable. I'm not saying the client is great, but you can buy games on it and play them. And Fortnite is one of the biggest games in the world. And so you've got all those players who are playing it on PC all have accounts on that service. And it's still just like, no. It's why they're giving away free games. It's because they want people to get used to the idea of visiting that store and clicking on a thing and going, now I have a game. Look at me. We've got more games now. And they're like, great. let's get back to playing Fortnite. Like, I don't give a fuck about the free games on the Epic Store because I only play Fortnite, or, you know, whatever it is, right? And it's fucking fascinating that we've, like, as an industry have, like, gotten into this weird situation. Like, oh wait, these games are suddenly too popular. Now what? Now what do we do? Now we make more skins for Fortnite. Now you have game developers, seasoned game developers, who, instead of going off and making their own games, have decided that they want to be a part of the UEFN network, the network of, like, companies making things inside of Fortnite to then sell, or to then monetize. You know, Roblox has gone through a similar situation where, you know, you have people that have made proper big video games that are just like, actually, we're gonna try and make this thing in Roblox because we can prototype it super fast and the tools are this. Like, there are reasons outside of that. But also, if that's where a lot of the audience is, you've got to meet them where they are to try to get the money out of them, right? So I don't know. Like, this is I'm kind of going off of some of the things that Phil Spencer said in a recent interview about growing the video game industry and all of that sort of stuff, growing it in number. But, like, at the end of the day, like, you know, we also talk about, like, oh, well, what are the next consoles going to be? And do consoles need to exist? And does this need to happen? Does this need to happen? And so, like, as I think about Microsoft continuing to not make big AAA games on a regular basis, and some of that's the pandemic and whatever else, but, like, you look at the bets that they're placing these days, and, you know, they bought Call of Duty. That doesn't get any bigger than that. You know, I'll grant you. You know, like, having a big new AAA, you know, like how many people will care about a new Gears of War game? As an example, as an example, it's not meant to single out Gears of War. I would consider myself a fan of Gears of War. So I would be like, yes, I would like to finish this second trilogy and see what happens with the lady who's the queen's daughter, or whatever the hell it is. She's got her pendant on. We need to know how that ends, right? But it's a finite number. Like, I guess it's not that it's a finite number of people. Of course it is. It's in some ways that seems like a knowable number. You could probably do the research and go, like, hey, here's the percentage of people who have played Gears of War games before. We suspect that some percentage of them would maybe not come back unless the game reviewed above this number or whatever else. Or, you know, like, we think if you made these changes, you could maybe get these players back, or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, is that number big enough? Does that number matter? Is that number where you want to spend your resources, or do you want to go chase after something that could be 10 times as big? That reaches a younger audience? Because who in the, you know, how many are all of the people who still cares about Gears of War extremely old men now in the grand scheme of things? You know, like, you see a lot of people going, like, where's Gears of War? What's going on? Like, dude, Gears of War at some point became an old man's game. Right? It's old. It's been around for decades. It's not as old as Halo, but, you know, and, like, are you going to appeal? Like, how many new players are going to come in and go, like, I got to know what this is going on. I need to know what's happening in Gears of War 6. I'm sorry, Gears 6. So, like, at the end of the day, when I start thinking about, like, what I perceive to be the mindset of Phil Spencer, what I perceive to be the mindset of the Xbox brand of Microsoft and where they're headed and stuff, you then start to wonder, like, okay, do you even bother making a Gears of War game? Like, you probably do, because there's still enough people. it would be exciting, but you need to right size that budget. It's not the biggest game in the world that year. It's not one of the, like, and so if these games that were formerly on these pedestals back then are kind of like maybe not going to be as big as they used to be anymore, you know, what moves do you make? You're either going to fight for the finite number of, like, you know, gameplay, you know, the game aficionados, or, you know, like people that would buy a console, people that, you know, you're going to fight for that. And that's a big number. That's millions of players. You can build a business on that. No fucking problem. But is that where it's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, all of that other stuff, you know? And so what are the bets you're placing to make sure not that you'll just be having a big game in 2026, but that you're kind of shaping your business in a way that seems to, like, be going in the direction that maybe the players generally are? And what does that look like? I don't even know anymore. For Easter, we got together with some friends, and they got some older boys. I think one's like, I don't know how old they are. Maybe like 10 and, you know, 7, or, you know, like 10 and 12, maybe somewhere around there. I'm throwing a football back and forth with one of them, and he's telling me about this contraption he built in Minecraft. And he's like, yeah. And last time I saw him, he was all big on Fortnite. He had a Switch and he was playing Fortnite, and he had a headset on. He was yelling at some friend or something like that. And then the other kid also had, like, all these, like, yeah, I know how to type. I'm writing this script, you know, this redstone to this, and then when you step in it, the pistons crush you, and it sets you on fire. I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds awesome. And he was so into this, like, specific contraption that he was building inside of Minecraft. And then I talked to them about, you know, but, like, what, it's awesome. They're super psyched on it. They're super into it. But, like, I can't, like, I would be having a different conversation with them. I'm like, that's awesome, man. I fucking creebled onto a griffin, and then it flew halfway around the world, and then I fell off and died and had to reload my last save. My pawns got stuck on a thing, and they saw a sick ladder. And like, tell them, if I was telling them about my awesome adventures in Dragon's Dogma 2, it'd be like blank stares. It'd be like, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is dragons? What the fuck is a Dragon's Dogma? You know? In some ways, that's healthy because the game industry has grown, right? There are so many different types of players out there, and that was always the thing, you know? I just got done. I can't say anything specific about it, I guess, other than I just got done talking a lot about sitting down in front of a camera and talking a lot about some things in the 90s and 2000s. And it got me thinking about, like, how much smaller the video game industry was then in terms of the types of players they were targeting. And this is something, like, we talk about the 16-bit era, we talk about, you know, games before that and the types of players that were playing them. It was, you were down to play anything. You were just like, yeah, man, give me a game. I don't give a shit, man. Let's play Gods. Yes, let's go play Gods. You mean that shitty, like, kind of fucking Amiga? They ported it to Genesis. It's like a garbage ass fucking strategy. Yeah. No, I accidentally spent 10 hours playing Gods. Why? Because it was a video game and it was in front of me. And I'm playing these role-playing games, and I'm playing Madden, and I'm playing Joe Montana football, and I'm playing, you know, like, I'm playing all these fucking sports games, and, you know, like you just played games. And as the game industry grew and grew and grew, and as games became more complicated as well, don't forget that, you know, like, that's certainly a factor. When we get to the PlayStation, things kind of stretch out, and you know, you end up with the 40-hour cinematic RPG. Final Fantasy VII to me is one of the games that broke the way video games were. I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way per se, but, like, you know, Madden on the PlayStation, Game Day on the PlayStation, like, sports games definitely got more complicated. Winning 11 and some of the other soccer games that would get more complicated in the PlayStation era than they were previously, as well as role-playing games. and just the dedication that they required and all of that sort of stuff, you saw players branch out. You saw people go like, no, I like these role-playing games. And then you saw players go like, I want to shoot shit. And then other players going like, I like football, so I play Madden, or I like hockey, so I play NHL. And so ever since then, gaming has been kind of on that path, in a lot of ways, where it is branching out and reaching new players and so on and so forth. Or reaching players that are dedicated to a single type of video game or a handful of types of video games, as opposed to just video games. That's like the starting point for me when I look at how we got to the player who buys Call of Duty every year, and this is, I'm thinking Xbox 360 era when I'm saying this. The player who just buys Call of Duty and maybe like one other game. Like my roommate who would, my roommate had a PS2 when he moved in, and so we both got way into SOCOM. And then when the 360 came out and he saw me fucking around with that, he wanted to get one of those, and then we both played a ton of Call of Duty. And I had like hundreds of 360 games at that point. Like I was, I'm reviewing games, like they're just showing up all the time. But he never really dipped into that. He went and bought his own copy of Assassin's Creed. And so it got to a point where he was just playing Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed. And sometimes not even Assassin's Creed. And he'd find a World War II flight sim that he would get into here and there. But it was like, for me, it was like a fascinating look into just like, it was just not, I didn't have, like, most of the people I knew was through work, and they all played a fuck ton of video games. And so it was interesting to kind of get out and hear more of this. And you'd have pockets of players that would like innately know the Tony Hawk games and stuff like that. And but like, yeah, you start to run into these players that like are happy to own the console, but really only play a couple of games on it. And nowadays, all of those games that would maybe reach that kind of big mainstream peak, you don't necessarily need to own a console to play them. I guess Fortnite, you need something because you can't play it on phones. Presumably Fortnite will come back to phones someday. I wonder how many Switch sales were as a direct relation of Fortnite not being available on phones, because I feel like the other thing I see all the time is people playing Fortnite on Switch, or kids playing Fortnite on Switch. I was just talking to someone, another like friend of the family, and her daughter is big into Fortnite, and they play it on the Switch, and she's like tethering her phone to her Switch so she can play online in the backseat of the car while they're on a road trip and stuff like that. It's like, man, crazy. So that's the point, is we have so many different types of players. This is all kind of like, I'm all over the place a little bit here. I'll grant you, but I think this is all kind of dovetailing when we were talking last week about do people want consoles? What do people want down the line? I think that's kind of all a factor here. But I also think, as that stuff happens, whether it's kids who are used to playing games that are straight up free and they're happy to, occasionally get some money to buy some new skins or whatever, like kind of the Fortnite model, and how disruptive that is to the sale of full price retail games. All of those sorts of things. Or you have other players that are like getting fed up with all of it, and they're giving up completely and all that. Like the number of players who were here for the $60, $70 console game, that seems like the thing that's not growing. Like that end of the market is the thing that, seems like that's becoming more and more finite all the time. And that's something that settles in over the course of a generation, because I think, when a new console launches and the games theoretically like look better and whatever else, you also have that ability to attract players who maybe fell off. Like, oh, I owned an Xbox 360, but I haven't played games in a while, and man, that Spider-Man game looks really cool. Or, oh, I hear GTA 6 is coming out, so I gotta get a PlayStation, I guess. That'll be that'll move systems, right? Like people will go like, well, shit, I gotta get a PlayStation so I can play GTA 6. And that'll be a big deal. Imagine if GTA 6 launched and it was like playable on phones. Like, what would that do to that process, right? The lapsed player who would come back, you know, and you know, like forget about the part where the game would be compromised and whatever else. Like, you know, at the end of the day, some of those players are not going to care. Or if it was on a streaming service and they said like, oh wait, I could play this on my television. I could just go get this controller and I could play GTA on my TV. There was a guy that was coming in, the guy that did some of the wall repairs here when we had all that water damage. Was like a Stadia guy, or like, you know, was, you know, interested in the streaming stuff because he had a gaming laptop that was aging and he wanted to play Red Dead and it didn't run on that. And I'm like, well, you know, there's like stuff like GeForce Now, there's stuff like that. Like, you know, it's not like it's compromised, but like, yeah, you could do that. And then next time I saw him, he's like, dude, this is awesome. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. It's just not enough any players in any one of those pockets to really make the streaming thing work. But, you know, like that is the use case for that in theory. That's a person who didn't have to go out and buy a brand new laptop. It didn't have to go buy a new console. Instead, just paid a monthly fee and kept playing the game. And didn't mind didn't seem to mind those compromises that come with a streaming service on a game. I guess at this point we should just get into, you know, we should kind of like complete this thought a little bit. Phil Spencer spoke with Chris Plant over at Polygon during GDC. Here, I'll make it official. I wish that they would have just posted this entire conversation, but it seems like Polygon mostly broke it up into multiple news stories just based on some of the stuff that Spencer said in the interview. Some of this is around, you know, hey, any chance he gets, Phil Spencer will tell you that he really thinks that handheld PC type things are cool. And then people going like, well, what does that mean for the future of Xbox and all this other, you know, I guess one of the things to remember here is that Phil Spencer is the CEO of gaming. You know, he is no longer just the head of Xbox. Like, that's something that they, you know, you could look at that as maybe even a little bit of foreshadowing if you wanted to think about the kind of third-party announcement and some of that other stuff that they made. But as they've acquired studios like Bethesda and Activision, that are not necessarily just part of the Xbox studios, in some way, shape, or form, like, you know, at some point his title changed, and, you know, like some of those things sort of changed, I suppose. Couple little bits here. This is something that kind of fits in with some of the stuff I was talking about not that long ago in terms of the future of Xbox or the future of the console market. Polygon asked him like, hey, well, you know, what would you think about other stores on the Xbox? I'll quote the story directly. Again, this is from Polygon's interview. Spencer mentioned his frustrations with closed ecosystems, so we asked for clarity. Could he really see a future where stores like Itch and the Epic Game Store existed on Xbox? Was it just a matter of figuring out mountains of paperwork to get there? Yes, said Spencer. Consider our history as the Windows company. Nobody would blink twice if I said, hey, when you're using a PC, you get to decide the type of experience you have by picking where to buy games. There's real value in that. So sure, yeah, so that was when we were talking, when people talk about like an Xbox handheld. An Xbox handheld is not attractive at all. A handheld that just like has like a Series S level of power or something like that. Like on a closed ecosystem, like that's not interesting. A Windows machine that could play Xbox games, or or an Xbox, an open Xbox, a more open Xbox, if we think about it from the other way around, that could be cool. Something you can actually play more games on than just the stuff that comes to Xbox. Because at the end of the day, the Xbox platform is getting a subset of games. And so, of course, you would much rather, like, oh, if this could run PC games straight up, then I would have access to so much more than just what's available on the Xbox store. It's the same reason why, you know, like the problem with the PlayStation VR 2, where you're just like, well, it's a closed ecosystem. Like, I can play the 30 games they're selling, and that's it. Why, you know, as a consumer, why would you want that? That's crazy. When platforms like the Steam Deck, like the thing holding back the existing handheld PCs is Windows. That Windows is not nimble enough, is not well made enough or for that form factor, basically. And he also kind of went on to say that, you know, that the old kind of razor and blades model of you know, subsidizing the cost of your expensive game hardware by selling it at a loss and knowing that you'll make it up on the back end when you sell games, that's just not as much of a thing anymore. That, I feel like that's kind of known as console prices have gone up. It feels like we just haven't really seen the whole, like, let's sell these things at a deep discount the way we used to. And his quote there on that is like, it says, Moore's law has slowed down. The price of the components of a console aren't coming down as fast as they have in previous generations. And then he goes on to say, worse, the console market isn't growing, with more gamers moving to PC and handheld options. And so that notion of subsidizing a console, you know, doesn't work as well. And also maybe that's the reason why they don't want to buy a console. Subsidizing hardware becomes more challenging in today's world, and I will say, and this may seem too altruistic, I don't know that it's growing the industry. So I think, what are the barriers? What are the things that create friction in today's world for creators and players, and how can we be a part of opening up that model? And so part of his answer is, you know, some of the stuff they're doing is you know, like not chasing after exclusivity, which I think, you know, the people that get caught up in the exclusivity conversation are thinking about the games market as it stands today, or rather as it has stood for the last 10 years. Exclusivity is still working really well for the PlayStation, right? I mean, in some cases they're making deals. In some cases they don't have to make deals because the developer just has decided not to support the Xbox anyway, with a particular release, or they'll put it out a year later, which is basically the same thing. And so that's, when we talk about PlayStation, we talk about the PlayStation strategy up to this point. You know, they rolled out their cloud stuff. They've done little bits and pieces here and there, but like the PlayStation strategy when it comes to selling games is just like, fuck it, we're going to keep selling games the way we have always sold them. And they're $70 now. And we think a lot of people like God of War, and we think a lot of people like Spider-Man 2. And like the big changes they made is like, well, and we'll eventually put it out on PC because boy, these things are expensive. You know, so even they're kind of hedging in that direction ever so slightly, I suppose. His quotes here, you know, like, you know, he says, you know, like using Sea of Thieves as an example, that like players shouldn't have to worry about what their friends own or all that other stuff. And, you know, again, I think it's easy to get caught up in this and be like, yeah, man, that's just right. Like, also keep in mind that, like, you know, the Xbox is not selling super well in comparison to, you know, the PlayStation and some of this other stuff. So, like, you know, like, keep in mind that, like, part of Microsoft's gaming strategy is trying to find a path forward in a situation where they bungled the console race 10 years ago, whatever it was. You know, they threw it away. Like it was their lead. They came out of the Xbox 360 with astounding levels of goodwill. They overcame the Red Ring debacle and still achieved a very high level of sales and a high level of player engagement. They reshaped the video game industry in a lot of ways with the decisions they made about how the Xbox 360 system level services work. They made modern games. And then they said, yeah, well, we got that on lock, and those players will come along. Like they thought that was a gimme, which is kind of where we are. We talk about Tekken and we talk about some of the other things. Is it's a lot of publishers assuming that you're going to buy it no matter what, because that's what the numbers tell them. That's what history tells them. Is that, hey, they'll put up with a lot before they're not going to not buy Tekken, right? No matter what we do, they're still going to buy the game. I mean, they might complain, but they're still playing it. That's the assumption, and not necessarily in a nasty way, but the numbers usually dictate that that's the case, right? It takes a lot for players to give up on a thing. But Microsoft made that assumption at a console level and said, oh, look at how well we did with the Xbox. We got games on lock. Games are good. We don't need to invest in, we know what we're doing with games. We're going to get TV. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to take over. We're going to Microsoft the shit out of this thing. We're going to have the last set-top box you'll ever need, the one set-top box you'll ever need, everything. You're going to fucking Skype on this thing. It's going to be dope. Everyone loves Skype. When they announced the console, when they unveiled the console, there was a whole separate demo they gave us that was them running Skype on an Xbox. And they were like, look, you can see the person you're Skyping with in their big, and they're on your TV. And I'm like, yeah, that sucks. I don't want to fucking do that. I guess we could do that with the Xbox Live Vision cams too, technically, but and they made decisions that gave it all back to Sony, right? We don't need to rehash all that sort of stuff. You know that. If things had gone differently and Microsoft was still the leader in gaming, they might still think some of this stuff, and they might still think some of this stuff, it might be the right move for down the line, because they just kind of see the trend lines and they go, okay, the kids that are coming up and aging into our ecosystem aren't interested in our ecosystem the way we wish they were. Maybe they want a PC because they want to stream themselves. They want to run OBS. They want to have fucking Twitch alerts. They want to, be like their idols, which is a scary concept. But also maybe they want to play games on their phone. Maybe they want to play games on a handheld. Maybe they want to, like all of those other sorts of things, right? The thing they don't necessarily seem to want is to spend $500 on a console every 5 to 7 years. So if you're in the business where you are making most of your money on console, what do you do? And so that's sort of the thing. My point is that some of this is driven by Microsoft not being the leader in the space anymore, but also I think a lot of as much as Phil Spencer is having these conversations kind of out in the open, I don't think it's necessarily the case that Sony is not thinking at least partially along the same lines and going okay, well, because they're going to see the same pressure. They're going to see the same, hey, people are not maybe aging into it. We're going to have a demographic problem in another 5 years or something like that, where we, we're only selling these consoles to old dudes and they're putting them next to their really expensive headphone DAC, and they're the fucking, I bought a really nice record player, and I got an Xbox, and I got they're all hooked up to my cool headphones, and I can really just sit back and take some edibles and play, listen to, whatever. And so is that the future of the console? Does it just become the old man, the I grew up with these, and so that's what I like, and that's how I play, and that's what I'm going to keep doing? And meanwhile, the kids are going to come in and be like, have you seen this Call of Duty Warzone? The longer I play it, the better it looks. Here, it's on my, you tap here to shoot, tap here to aim down sights, tap here to, what? I guess, are we finally going to see the whole, this has been the hand wringing that, I feel like people have been doing for those last 10 years. Is oh, what's going to happen with phones? What's going to happen with this? What's going to happen with, and it's a little different because the popularity of streaming I think like makes people want to have a PC that maybe didn't have one before, you know? And I think even, you know, there's probably some interest. I don't know. Maybe they don't care. That would be the thing I'd be curious about with the kids, who are playing games like Minecraft on a Switch, or playing games like Fortnite on a Switch. Do they all eventually, would they love to have a PC because it can run their games that they love so much better? As well as also allowing them to play the quote unquote real Minecraft? Or do they just not give a shit? And they're just like happy to play it the way it is. I would be curious to know. You know, because some of them will want to be streamers, and some, you know, because they're watching people on YouTube and they do all this other stuff. Like, would they, you know, like, is it part of the aspirational nature of that stuff to where they're just like, yeah, I'm going to love to have streaming and do this stuff? Because, like, yeah, obviously, yes, you can stream out of the console in a lot of cases. I assume the PlayStation 5 still does that. I know the PS4 did. The Xbox still does. It's not the same thing, you know? It's not the same level of control you get over the stream, you know? So no one wants to do that. I'm sure there's still people doing it, but it's the stopgap before you go like, oh, well, we need to buy a capture card. What the fuck are we doing? So yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess, like, I think of it as like a lot of stuff is really up in the air right now. And some of that stuff actually kind of scares me as someone who has liked games for a very long time. Because you do start to see like, oh, this could lead to the end of, you know, and some of that ties into the microtransaction stuff we were talking about, where it's like, they sure seem to be trying to fucking squeeze money out of everybody as hard as they fucking can these days, huh? That really sucks. It's a real fucking pain in the ass. It sucks that they're doing it. Is it because they're afraid of contraction when it comes to the types of players that want to play these types of games? Maybe. I don't know. There was also the so they also I like the way that the Polygon has framed this as basically one theme was inescapable at GDC. What the hell is going on in the game industry, and how will video game makers and publishers get out of it? And to that end, they say that Spencer pointed to a collision of rising budgets, diversifying business models, and the exceptional financial risk now required to meet the audience expectations of a AAA release. And that's what leads to Spencer's path forward being abandoning assumptions about exclusivity and attracting new customers who have cooled on the console experience. Which, you know, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And, you know, when Phil Spencer is saying like it can cost $300 million to build a video game. Yeah, so I guess like the answer is like, why make? Do they have to be? When we think about especially if we think about targeting new players, when we think about targeting players who are largely playing games on phones and on the Switch, and targeting a new generation of players, like, no, there's no fucking book that says that all the assets must be 4K. There's no book that says that like everything needs to be done to that degree, that everything needs to be built to that level. You know, like players who have been playing games for a while will have those expectations. And I suppose if you put out a game and it looks kind of funky compared to other games, then, you know, maybe that's a downward, you know, like that's a strike against a game that maybe hurts it in the market. But, you know, we're at a point where, you know, they're going to release a PlayStation 5 Pro and they're searching for, you know, they're trying to get games to finally run at 4K. The song they've been singing since the PS4 Pro of like, yeah, now that games can be in 4K. Like, yeah, not really, but sure, keep telling yourself that. So, you know, obviously a lot of things have gotten more expensive, and so, you know, like if you're paying your developers right and all that stuff, that's going to be more money than maybe it was 10 years ago. Sure. Cost of living increases alone would cause that. Um, but a lot of games, a lot of popular games that have their big weird moment, like Among Us. Here's probably a good example in some weird way. Like, how much did it cost to make Among Us? I mean, over the years since it's gained popularity, I'm sure it is. They have put even more money into it, but think about the amount of money that game has probably made. Pal World, in terms of like games that kind of like launched big and went crazy. Yeah, Balatro, which is Balatro's not going to be some 300. It's probably not going to make hundreds of millions of dollars. But you know what? It didn't cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Vampire Survivors, like the games that have these. I mean, for lack of a better term, I mean, no, there are better terms, but like viral success like that, where they have their big moment and everyone's talking about them and everyone has to play them, and like Lethal Company and like these games that come along. By and large, they're not the big shiny AAA experiences. It's not Skull and Bones, the world's first quadruple A game. It's these kind of smaller, more expressive experiences, like in a lot of cases that are about those social interactions. So like you could take that as a learning. If you took that as your pure learning of just like, here's what people want in video games anymore, you would never make a story-driven single-player game ever again. You would never make Spider-Man 2 or 3. You would be like, God of War, we're throwing that in the fucking bammer, man. That thing's a money pit. The next God of War is it's 3 Kratoses, and they go to the fucking weird rainbow bridge, and we send them on missions, and then the 3 Kratoses come back, and then they get more loot, and then maybe they buy a different colored Kratos skin. And then we sell them emotes, and they're all angry, except for one where all 3 of the Kratoses kiss. All the Kratoses kiss. And that one's $20 because it's the best one. So yeah, games probably shouldn't cost $300 million. I don't know. That does at the end of the day, I don't know where that money goes. So if we were able to stare at a full like P&L, a full like budget for a game and look at it, I don't think we would be that much further along in understanding where all that money goes. But like I was saying, hey man, these rocks got to look good now because they have to, right? But do they? I don't know. And so because of how expensive those games get, Spencer kind of goes on to say that that exclusivity becomes even more perilous at that point, because a game that costs you potentially $300 million, you could sell on multiple platforms and reach way more customers. Whereas if you were only selling it on PlayStation, you can only reach those millions of players. But if they were also selling it on Xbox and they were also selling it on PC, and blah, blah, blah. You kind of move in that direction. And like Spencer's kind of out there saying that the console market has not grown in the past year. That's been the things have been relatively flat. And the way Polygon has broken this down is that Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch consoles continue to sell, but it's many console players upgrading. So it's not necessarily contributing to the growth. They're not new to the market. They're players who hadn't bought a console in this generation yet, or later this year. It will be PlayStation 5 owners with money to burn that will decide that they need to have a PlayStation 5 Pro, for example. Or people that decide, I need an OLED Switch over a regular Switch. Or what if I had a white Xbox Series X, I guess. But yeah, there are plenty of players who bought a console last time around who still probably haven't made the jump. And that's why you still see Call of Duty shipping on PlayStation 4. Acronym in the chat says, just realized I've skipped the last 2 console cycles. Yeah. And you're in a Twitch chat for a video game podcast. Like you're even with that in mind, you're still pretty dedicated to video games, you know? And the PC, well, look, I love the PC. The PC's a hassle. The PC can be a real hassle. But I spent that money up front, and these games oftentimes look better. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they launch extra fucked up on PC. That's always fun. But in theory, the PC is fantastic. And I think that's when we talk about the handhelds and all that other stuff, like I want that same level of openness on a handheld. And so when people talk about an Xbox handheld, like, no, man. Like, that's okay. Yeah. Okay. It's a Game Pass machine and you can do this and that. Like, yeah, sure. Whatever. But wouldn't it also be awesome if it could do that stuff and also do whatever the fuck else you want to do with it? I don't know. So they asked about the layoffs, the Activision layoffs, and just layoffs in general, right? This part here. Polygon asked Spencer if the Activision Blizzard King layoffs were part of this wider trend, or if there was something unique about those layoffs as they pertained to the current Xbox business. And his quote here is, "It's a little bit of both, but I'll say the thing that has me most concerned for the industry is the lack of growth. And when you have an industry that is projected to be smaller next year in terms of players and dollars, and you get a lot of publicly traded companies that are in the industry that have to show their investors growth, because why else does somebody own a share of someone's stock if it's not going to grow? The side of the business that gets scrutinized is the cost side, because if you're not going to grow the revenue side, then the cost side becomes challenged." I don't know, Phil Spencer sounded like a socialist there, if you ask me. No, I mean, it's interesting. It is interesting to hear him basically say that capitalism is the problem. Which, of course, yes. He said, then he goes on, "We're a business, I've said over and over, I don't get any luxury of not having to run a profitable, growing business inside of Microsoft. And we are that today, but just across the industry. You mentioned it, and in sitting here at GDC, I reflect on friends of mine in the industry that have been displaced and lost their jobs, and how just, I don't want this industry to be a place where people can't with confidence build a career. So that's why I keep pivoting back to, how does this industry get back to growth? But to your question, for us at Xbox or any of the teams that are out there, it really is an outcome of an industry that's not growing. It can grow and it will grow again, but you see this time right now and the implications have human impact, and we should all reflect on that and think about it." I think it's pretty interesting to have someone in his position who reports to the head of Microsoft basically say, like, yeah, the fucking stock price, like, basically say that is part of, the overall industry's woes, right? Like the layoffs, the human impact part of that is a little, it's like, it's kind of just maybe a little shitty way to frame it, but he's not necessarily wrong. Like a lot of this stuff is very caught up in what would, we are all caught in the fucking trap, right? Trapaholics. And so, they kind of close on just like what that means for Xbox in general, right? Because like Xbox is not, like, I don't know, man. Like and so, we're starting to see more and more. There was a column on videogameschronicle.com basically saying like, yeah, man, it seems like Phil Spencer's bad at his job, or like, hey, he's a nice guy, but it doesn't seem like it's happening for them anymore. And this is, I think people have been kind of leaning in this direction for a bit now. And I think he's even brought it up in interviews years ago, just like, yeah, if I don't run this successfully, then I don't get to do this anymore. And, I don't think it's necessarily being run successfully, and we'll see. We'll see. Like, is it time for them to make a change at the top and move on from Phil Spencer and put someone else in the chair? Like, I don't know. Like, that's the sort of situation where, like, I'm not internal. I don't, everything I've heard about him is like, he's very smart. He knows what the fuck he's doing. And that he's good, and he's trying to do the right thing, which isn't always the most money-making thing or whatever else. But that, that only takes you so far. So with that in mind, and again, that's just what I've heard. It's not, like, I've never seen him in action, I suppose, internally or whatever. So, but I guess I look at it and go, like, what would anyone else do in this position? Like, if you were buying Activision, if you're buying a company the size of Activision, and I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner with Bethesda, layoffs, right? Like, okay, obviously there's the larger tech industry, the world of, like, the ongoing layoffs across the business are like a fucking insane situation. And it's fucked. But when a company acquires another company, the expectation is that part of the savings of that merger comes from layoffs. And we just saw this with Gearbox, which we'll get into. But it is that idea that, like, hey, there are going to be central services at your company, accountants, in terms of video games, maybe public relations teams or community people, which is, it's shitty. But, like, you have people that are maybe, like, working in a central capacity that have people on the other side of the merger already doing those jobs. And so you look at it and go, do we need 2 teams devoted to this? Do we still need to have this entire PR team when we already have a PR team? Do we maybe take 2 of their people and move them over here to this central outfit and lay the rest of them off? And so, like, that, that is how when you buy a company, that's what you do. You lay people off. It sucks shit, but, like, that is when you look at it and go, like, okay, if we buy this company, we can run it more efficiently because we already do this, this, and this, and so that fits together with what they're doing. But they already have people in those positions, so we will lay them off, or we will find different positions for them, and whatever, glad hand, like, oh, we'll do our best to get them a new job, like, whatever. But, like, this is how it happens. Like, that is always how. And so it was weird when they bought Bethesda. You didn't really hear about, and now that they've done these layoffs, you did hear about it. But, like, they just kind of let Bethesda run the way Bethesda had been running from the sounds of things. And this is, some of the stuff that bit them in the ass when Redfall came out, where they were, some of the excuses given at that point were like, yeah, maybe we should have had a tighter handle on some of those studios that we just bought. You're like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. But, like, that's the cycle, right? Especially at companies of this size and this level. And so the idea that there were layoffs at Activision is not necessarily weird on its own. The people that did get chosen to be laid off and where the cuts came from were maybe deeper than you might expect, because they're also kind of tied up in this larger industry reset where everyone's just like, let's get some layoffs through the door while everyone else is doing it, because no one's going to point a finger at us. Ubisoft just laid off another 45 people, like yesterday, whatever it was. And so, I don't know. That's how it happens, I guess, is the point there. So, like, I don't, like, some of that stuff was going to happen either way, and it's weird that it didn't happen sooner. It seemed like something that should have happened sooner, and I don't know why they just took a long time to integrate those studios into their overall system or whatever the deal is. This is a couple of paragraphs here of quotes from Phil Spencer at the end here that I'll read here, because I find them I find the position that he is in and the position that company is in to be endlessly fascinating. When take the long view on just the Xbox brand, and even just to a greater extent Microsoft's history in gaming prior to the Xbox, and you look at where they got to, and you look at where they got to with a 360, and you just look at the, like, this is like, it's the sort of thing you think that someone is teaching in business school somewhere. Like, here's a case study for you of a CEO misreading the market and chasing television, and here's where they are now, and they've been trying to dig themselves out of this hole and for all these years, and not getting there. Anyway, so I will say every decision we make today and tomorrow is for the better of Xbox. I know sometimes things get weaponized, that there's some evil in the background that's making us do things. Like, Phil hates exclusives, and that's why we're like PlayStation and Switch now. Every decision we make is to make Xbox stronger in the long run. It doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with every decision we make, but it is fundamental for how we make decisions. Now, before you get all like, oh yeah, they care about Xbox, they like, remember that, like, Xbox to them is a much bigger kind of blanket brand than I think outside the company. When you use the word Xbox, people think about an Xbox hooked up to a television with an HDMI cable, whereas they think about it much differently. And so, with that, I bring you the second part of this. The notion that Xbox can only be this one device that plugs into a television isn't something we see in the Gen Z research, because nothing else is like that for them. Some of them will have an iPhone, some will have an Android, but all the games and everything is the same. I can still get to TikTok on both of them, at least for now. All of their stuff is available wherever they want. So for Xbox, our brand pivot, as we attract and maintain relevance with a younger audience, is Xbox is a place where I can find the great games I want to, which is not a great sentence, but like, you get the point. And so, yeah, I don't know if they're seeing that, younger audiences are not interested in that kind of walled garden, like, I get it. If those are the conclusions that they're coming to when it comes to the spending habits of the youth, the damn kids, then yeah, I think that they need to really rethink what is an Xbox. How does Xbox reach players when it comes to the incoming generations of players that are about to be age appropriate for some of those games, T-rated games, eventually M-rated games, eventually, just like bigger console style experiences. How do you reach them? What do you make for them? And so on and so forth. Like I said, it's fascinating, and it's a very interesting position that they're in, and I don't know what, like, I look at it and go, like, I don't think, like, people get mad about, like, oh, I can't believe they're bringing these games to the Switch or this to the PlayStation 5 or whatever. Like, sure, you could debate that back and forth, but, like, I don't know what you do at that point. I don't know how you reach that generation. I imagine that's like, everyone's going to do all their research and try to figure out, like, okay, what the fuck are we going to do? Like, this, is this style of gaming, is the console style of gaming, is it going to go out of favor? Is it going to, what's the end result of all of that hand wringing that has been happening for a long time? Because it feels like they're running out of time to figure out what they're going to do next. And I at least get the impression that that's something that Xbox is thinking about and talking about very publicly. Again, I don't mean to say that Sony is not thinking about those same things. They just are not as forthcoming when it comes to talking about this sort of stuff, because they're in a more leadership position and they don't have to. So, but sometimes when I look at this stuff, when I look at that thought process, and I look at, like, oh, what are they going to do to attract Gen Z? And I look at microtransactions in single player games and battle passes making their way into even more games and live service games and all of this, all of these kind of financially motivated, all of it. I mean, again, it is a business. They love to make people happy and make cool shit. That's why a lot of people develop games, because they get to make a bunch of cool shit. But also, they have to make cool shit at a company that has to stay in business, that has to pay its people, that has to, and they can't even do that. They're laying off people left and fucking right. So, like, it's very easy to, like, collate all of this information and feel pretty downtrodden about, like, what is gaming even going to look like in 5 years? Like, what's the end game of all of this? And is it something that, like, people who were raised on console games, is it something that they will want to continue to engage with? Or are they going to be a casualty of this chase for a younger audience? And either they're going to get on board or, get out of the way, or whatever you want to call it, right? I don't know. That's the fun part. I don't know. It's fun to think about. I like video games. I don't know. I like playing video games. I always have, as far back as I can remember. I always wanted to be a player of video games. And that was let's call that 40 plus years. And I still like new video games. Like I think there a lot of guys my age have already aged out, right? You see some of them making angry YouTube videos about video games and whatever else, right? And so what does that mean? Right? Are you going to end up being like, back in my day, you're going to become one, like the other option is like, are you going to become one of those guys that's like, you guys, I put the cartridge in the system and you used to have to blow on the cartridges. That's bad for them, right? But it's actually bad for them. But like, everyone did it. Anyway, you would just put the cartridge in and put it, and it would work. Like, yeah, I don't know, man. I feel like that's like somehow 2 steps away from like getting a pair of Oakley blades and recording angry fucking videos for TikTok in the front seat of a pickup truck. Like, it's just right there. It's just right fucking there. So I don't know. I like the way that a lot of video games. I like the way that this business has progressed, and so like I like the idea of games that are online, that you connect to a server and interact with other players, and you work together. Like the different kind of social aspect, and we see that in the biggest games right now, that let people come together and do all kinds of cool shit. We see a lot of great smaller indie teams doing a bunch of cool shit all the time. And, like I think video games are fucking exciting as fuck, So I don't look at it and think like, oh, well, eventually this is not going to be for me anymore. But sometimes you look at all this data and you look at all this stuff and go like, man, a lot of fucking slop surrounding these great games. There's a lot of shit in the way. You got to pick a little bit of it out of your teeth to get to the good stuff in some of these games sometimes. And how much shit are you willing to pick out of your teeth before you throw up your hands and then I think the Oakleys just magically show up at your house and you just go like, all right, back in my day. Yeah, I don't know. Here's something else to get mad about. Xputer.com has images of a diskless Xbox Series X in the color of white. This doesn't look like necessarily final hardware. It looks like it's like bolted to a table. It's like super low res photos or something. But it is the same shape. We saw the leaked image had this kind of like curved front to it, more of a cylinder or a half cylinder, a D shape looked at from above. This appears to be the exact same form factor as the existing Xbox Series X. It is just white and it does not have a disk drive on it. It still seems to have the same hookups in the back for the plug-in memory expansion. We don't really have a good answer on like, is this going to have a bigger SSD in it or something like that? Or what are they going to do? This is just said to be out later this year, and according to the xputer.com, which is the source of these images, that it doesn't seem like there are any major enhancements. And its price, as per my knowledge, is expected to be introduced in a lesser bracket as compared to the currently available Xbox Series X, which retails for $499.99 in the US. It's a clunky sentence, but I think what is being said there is that the idea is that this thing will be cheaper. I would assume that they would instead go the route of increasing the internal storage and keeping it the same price, because the Series S is their low cost option for that. So I would assume they would say like, oh, this thing actually has 2 terabytes or 4 terabytes. 4 terabytes that'd be expensive. Those are still pricey, but maybe they move up to 2 terabytes of internal storage and no drive and keep it at $499. I don't know. Maybe they do it as a limited edition type thing and like, it comes in white now, yay. I don't know. But also, this report is saying no major enhancements to talk about, which and that, you know, a few upgraded components such as the heat sink, which is like, okay. The rumored the leaked dock from back in the day, ancient history now, was more along the lines of like, hey, we're gonna have faster Wi-Fi. We're going to have a less power draw. So, you know, we're gonna it sounded like a more ambitious redesign of the internals, at least, than what's being said here, but it's hard to know. This report is not necessarily about the specifics of the internals, so we don't really know where that stuff's going to net out in the end. But the report here does seem to say that this console is due out this summer, so maybe this is like a Summer Games Fest announcement kind of thing. Who knows? But I don't know. This is I think that they should sell an add-on drive the same way that Sony is doing. I think that that's a cool way to bridge this current gap where it's like, hey, we want to try to get these things in people's hands. We want to try to save as much money as possible. Increasingly, consumers are buying games digitally anyway. So it's another thing that's very easy to go about, but at the end of the day, consumers are sending the message that they are totally okay with digital purchases. You know? So do they do a USB drive or something? You know, it doesn't look like you could bolt a drive onto this as elegantly as perhaps you can with the current PlayStation 5 situation. But maybe they do eventually do an external drive for people who do want that. I think that's a solid way to go. Maybe they don't have to. Maybe the numbers tell them that, like, fuck it, we don't even have to offer that. We will offer, if you want that, buy it. If you want that, we'll continue to sell the existing Series X or whatever, right? That'll be the direction they go in. But I wonder if we will eventually get some kind of like optional external bolt-on drive for Xbox similar to PlayStation, just because they want to kind of simplify some of their product lines and still offer the option, because there is still some amount of hand-wringing and anger about a digital only console. We'll see. Yeah, this report says it's due out in the summer, so that's really, really right around the corner. Embracer has sold Gearbox. This is was expected to happen. We had some reporting, I believe, out of Kotaku about basically that they were close to selling the company. There was an internal meeting where Randy Pitchford had said basically like we're close to doing the deal and getting away from Embracer. That has happened, and Take-Two Interactive is the company that has purchased Gearbox. There has been some layoffs, like I said before, in some of those kind of central services, PR and such, some layoffs at Gearbox as a result of this. That happened pretty fast. Take-Two is buying the studio for $460 million, and they are working on a new Borderlands. Surprise, surprise. This looks like a stock deal. So yeah, Kotaku is reporting the entire deal will be paid in newly issued Take-Two shares, with closing expected to be completed by the end of Embracer's fiscal first quarter, which ends in June. And yes, Take-Two has put out a press release as a part of this. Gearbox and 2K in active development on next installment of Borderlands series. That's unsurprising, you know. So 2K, Take-Two, if you will, has controlled part of the Borderlands IP. They owned part of that property, and so I think even, you know, with Gearbox under Embracer, like, Take-Two was still going to have their hands in the Borderlands business, no matter what. And so this probably simplifies a lot of that situation on the Take-Two side. And also, I mean, this is also a situation now where Take-Two can fully call the shots as to what Gearbox is and is not working on, and how long they can take to do it, and so on and so forth. I remember hearing stories. I remember hearing that there were definitely people on the Take-Two side of things who were typically very frustrated when it came to working with Gearbox, because they didn't own Gearbox. It was more of like, well, we're partners in this thing, when Gearbox can kind of take as long as they want making a new Borderlands, but like, we're fucking waiting on it over here, and what the fuck are they doing? And, you know, there was a lot of frustration. Not a lot of frustration, but I remember hearing there were some people who were frustrated. I don't want to paint it as like a company-wide thing, but there were definitely heard stories about like, boy, I wish we owned Gearbox so we could fucking just get them to fucking make the goddamn game. And so now they can. I am always going to be interested in what Borderlands is doing. I'm always going to want to know what is a Borderlands 4, you know, what is the future of Borderlands? What is the next Borderlands going to be? Is it something that's based on the movie? Is it something that is, because that movie is still presumably happening? But I liked that first game enough, and I like that genre, the loot-driven action RPG, first-person shooter, like all of that sort of stuff, that like I'm gonna want to see what they do. I've made peace with that, but also I think that Borderlands 3 is a really dreadful thing to listen to. Mostly, I just think from a writing standpoint and like all of that, it's so fucking bad. It is so shockingly just like, are you fucking serious? And this game took you how long to make? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, the writing, the just the structure, even some structural things in that game. I think Borderlands 3, like from a gameplay perspective, is mostly fine. I don't think I'm ever going to like a character class in a Borderlands game as much as I liked, what the fuck is Roland from Borderlands 1. I don't think that I'm going to like any character class they make it as much as I enjoyed playing as that dude in that first game. And that's because he was broken, and that's because he was very survivable when you were playing alone. And so over the years, they made, you know, they never made a class that felt perfect in a invincible sort of way, the same way they did with Roland in that first game. So I don't know. And they did that Tiny Tina game, which some people seem to really like. And again, like I thought Wonderlands is like a really interesting idea, but boy, oh boy, is that not a thing I wanted to engage with because of, again, the sense of humor and the writing, the characters, the voice acting, the all of that stuff is just so like not what I so don't want it. I so don't want it. It was funny to hear stories about people playing Borderlands 3 and like on the PC and going in and like deleting all the voice files or turning all the like just like fucking shut this fucking game up. I ended up turning all the voice down. I ended up finishing it on PlayStation 5, I think. And like halfway through it, I ended up turning the voices down. I was just like, I fucking can't, man. I don't want to hear any of this bullshit. It's a shame because I think that Borderlands 1 was much more restrained in that department and like, you know, and it was a different time in a lot of ways too. But like that is a game that has gotten progressively worse in terms of how it's written and the style of comedy and just like the types of jokes they go for. Just some of the stupidest shit. And I'd be interested to see if they ever course correct on that. It feels like something they have to do. It feels like something they have to do, right? They'll eventually have to go like, we have got to fucking fix this thing. But I don't know. Like, I don't know. Maybe, you know, the other thing is I think a lot of people have fucking real terrible senses of humor. That I'm trying not to, I don't sound elitist that way, but it's impossible to do so. I think that there are people who like that shit. There has to be, right? Clearly the people writing it do. But there are people who think that that's like fucking hilarious. I mean, it's like, yeah, whatever. There's someone out there. There's someone out there within the last, you know, it's almost noon here in California. This calendar day, sometime over the last 12 hours, someone has fucking been like, the cake is a lot. Like someone is rolling out their fucking hot fucking gamer humor. Someone's doing it. The Portal stuff is super fucking funny. On its own merits. Portal is hilarious. You motherfuckers drove it into the dirt because you're incapable of writing your own jokes. And then Borderlands is just a weird reflection of like that audience's desires. And so like, whatever. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm interested to see what the future of Borderlands holds, and I wonder if they will ever fucking fix that aspect of the game, because Jesus Christ. Quote from Randy Pitchford here about the project they have in development, which is the next Borderlands game. Look, we haven't even announced anything of it. This was given to IGN, I guess, in an interview. Clearly, we're working on something, and I know what we're working on, and holy shit, it's the greatest thing we've ever done, and I can't wait, but it's not time yet. There will be a time. Thank you, Mr. Pitchford. Some people are saying, like, oh, this $460 million is less than half than what Embracer paid for Gearbox, but a lot of that $1 billion or 1 point, whatever the number thrown around for the Gearbox acquisition was, a lot of that was based on earnouts and bonus payments and stock, you know, like there were just like certain performance targets over time that I don't think had triggered yet. So I imagine that Embracer never quite had to pay that full $1 billion before they went and dealt it off like this. Which I wonder then if Take-Two was on the hook for some. I don't know. Probably not. That probably would have been in the reporting if that was the case. Embracer. So yes. So Embracer has sold Gearbox off, and they are saying that this is the completion of its restructuring. This again comes to us from videogameschronicle.com. So I know what you're thinking. Oh, the Embracer restructuring is done. They're hopefully done laying people off, and this puts them on a path, and maybe our long international nightmare is over. On the day the restructuring was completed, CEO this is again from the Video Games Chronicle article here. CEO Lars Wingefors was asked in an investor call whether Embracer was ready to start acquiring studios again, to which he replied it was too early to say. Looking to do more deals, I think it's way too early to start talking about restarting the mergers and acquisitions engines again. Ah! Ah! What the? Don't sell your studio to fucking Embracer. don't sell your studio to. I mean, unless they're just going to pay you a bunch of money and you're like, yeah, man, fucking run it into the ground. We're getting money and we're getting out of here. Now we are in the late phases of the consideration into the future of the group, and that's our highest focus and priority, how we set ourselves up and structure ourselves and utilize our assets we have within the group and have them work together, and how we leverage them better working together, utilizing different functions. I think that's our focus right now, to increase profitability and cash flow generation by simply making better products and games. That sounds like an AI wrote it. And of the Gearbox sale, he says, through the transaction, we lower business risk and improve profitability as we transition to becoming a leaner and more focused company. So, all told, VGC has done the math on this. They have canceled around 30 games and have laid off nearly 1,300 people. But it's too early to think about starting up the old acquisition engines again, right? I mean, let's... oh, my God. Oh, my God. That's frightening. That's terrifying. That's terrifying news. Guild Wars 3 is in development. Speaking of terrifying news. No, the ArenaNet has confirmed that they are in development on Guild Wars 3. This comes from an NCSoft shareholder meeting that was in Korean and then translated by a Reddit user and reported by Kotaku.com. Kotaku says that this has left some Guild Wars 2 fans worried as to how long Guild Wars 2 will remain active if the studio is going to move on to Guild Wars 3, which makes sense. Yeah, it seems like the talk has been swirling for a while. It makes sense. They should probably make another Guild Wars, I guess. People seemed to like. I did not like Guild Wars 2, for the record. So on my side of things, I'm like, well, if they made Guild Wars 3 a little bit more like Guild Wars 1 and a lot less like Guild Wars 2, that would be awesome, but I bet they don't do that. I bet they just go and just like make another thing that just looks like another MMO. I don't know. Remember what the fuck's I thought of this. I was scrolling through the PlayStation 5 store last night looking at games that were on sale. And remember Crime Boss Rockay City? Remember that fucking thing? Michael Madsen and Chuck Norris, like, that happened. That's not like a fucking fever dream. Like, that game actually came out and existed. And they put Vanilla Ice in it and all this other stuff. That game came that Anyway, that's neither here nor there. That was just like something that I saw and just like it hit me like between the eyes. I was like, oh God, Jesus, that did it. Oh my God. Sega is making some, I guess making some moves is maybe the wrong way to put it. They are selling off Relic Entertainment off to a holding company started by an investment company. And they are also cutting 240 jobs in Europe. It says the majority of the cuts, according to Video Games Chronicle, are being made at Creative Assembly and Sega Europe, with some more jobs being cut at Sega Hardlight. And so, yeah, Relic is basically going independent. Isn't quite the word for it, since they'll be owned by a holding company and all of that sort of stuff, but they will no longer be under the Sega umbrella. Sounds like maybe some employees found out about this because it went public and they apologized for that. I guess it was because of some of the way stuff had to be done due to Japanese law. And yeah, remember Creative Assembly was the studio that was working on Hyenas, which got canceled. And so yeah, they're gonna lose some people there. Sega Europe head Jurgen Post said Sega is working closely with Relic on this shift, and we wish them the best for the future. I want to sincerely apologize for the worry and understandable distress this news will cause, particularly for those directly affected, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, Relic has done what, like Company Heroes, and they did the Age of Empires stuff more recently. So I don't know. That's we'll see where Relic gets up to outside of the confines of Sega, which Sega seems like another weird. Sega is just another really weird business, right? I mean, especially like these layoffs are coming out of Europe, and it felt like at some point there became two Segas, right? There became the Sega you thought about as being the same company that put out fucking Space Harrier and Sonic the Hedgehog. And then there was this weird European branch that rose up and started, they bought all these developers and started making all these PC games and doing all this stuff. And yeah, Relic did some Warhammer stuff as well. Yeah, I don't know. So I don't know if it seems like the Japanese side of Sega is maybe a little more ascendant insofar as they're like, we're making Streets of Rage and we're going to make a new Jet Set Radio and a new Crazy Tag, like all this other stuff that they're going to try to bring to the market. And obviously the Yakuza franchise, the Like a Dragon franchise, is doing quite well for them as well. And then there's the Atlas. Like, it's a weird company. Weird company now when you think about what Sega was 20 years ago making football games. Jim Ryan is out at Sony as of yesterday. April 1st was his final day with the company, and he did a podcast and just kind of dropped in there that they sold 160 million PlayStation 2s. Which is an updated number. If he's right and not just rounding up and not just going like, I don't know, like 160 million because it's a podcast. The last number that had been reported was like 155 or something in that vein. But yes, he appeared on the official PlayStation podcast, and VGC has recapped that. And Hiroki Totoki has stepped in. He's been at Sony for a while, and while they find a new CEO to run the PlayStation division, he is going to be keeping a closer eye on it. He's the guy who was giving those quotes a while back about Bungie, I guess specifically. But though originally people were applying his quote to all of the PlayStation studios and basically saying, I'm going around and looking at all these companies and, looking at these studios, looking at this studio, and they seem really passionate, but they could be smarter about spending money. Like, oh, okay. All right, I see. So we'll see what ends up happening there. I don't know. Who do you find to run PlayStation? Do you promote from within? Like, I don't know who you, because they don't have they reorganized in a lot of ways that they didn't have a head in the US anymore. When Sean Layden left, I think that was probably partially because of, oh, by the way, Jim Ryan's going to run the entire division out of the UK now. And so, your abilities to get things done in the US is probably going to be maybe even a little less than it was before or whatever. But, yeah, Matt Kessler. That's the answer. That guy can do anything. The number I have I've talked to a couple of developers over the years who have worked directly with Kessler and been like, that guy's incredible. Like, he's the best like partner, like in terms of like talking to someone on the publisher side. He's the best guy at this I've ever dealt with. Like, it's good to know. Good to know Matt Kessler out there getting it done. And that's the news. So video games continue to be at an interesting spot, right? I think that's still the big takeaway, right? I think we're probably not through the layoffs yet. I mean, there's still people collecting a check out there that I'm sure that someone will fucking lay off at some point. It's bad out there. It's still bad out there. It doesn't need to be. Well, there's an interesting interview with one Adam Boyes of Iron Galaxy. I believe that ran on gamesindustry.biz. Let me just double check here. Yeah. Talking about, just a lot of the situation that the industry is in and some of that stuff. Obviously, Iron Galaxy has been pretty good at finding stuff for its people, right? When Rumbleverse shut down, I think pretty much all those people got pivoted onto other projects and they've been able to avoid layoffs. I suppose, knock on wood for them. But yeah, it's interesting. He's got a lot of interesting perspective because obviously he was internal at PlayStation for a while. He has been at third-party development like that. And that dude has been a lot of different places, and so it's some interesting points in there as well. Let's get into some emails. Podcast@guard.bike is the email address. If you want to send in emails to me, I'll look at them. Man. Buck writes in. No, you know what? We're gonna hang on. Maybe we'll come back to that one. Let's see here. I had sorry, this stuff got all jumbled up. Kyle writes in from Austin, Texas, and says, in 2024, how do you feel about your brief appearance on Good Morning America? My professional career led me to shaking hands with Katie Couric and NBC once, and whenever it comes up, my thoughts are, yeah, that was a fun 10 minutes. I don't know, yeah, so I was, I don't know, yeah, so for people who don't know, I was on Good Morning America the morning the Dreamcast launched, back in 99. I can't get into the context, but I was just talking about this in front of someone else's camera not that long ago. And I don't know, it was a very interesting experience because for me, it was like I was at work on the 8th, September 8th. And Lauren Gonzalez, formerly Lauren Fielder, came over and said, hey, do you want to go be on Good Morning America tomorrow? And it was like already early afternoon on the 8th at this point. I was like, hey, they're looking for someone to come out there and talk about the Dreamcast on Good Morning America. And do you want to fly out there right now and do that? And I was like, yeah, that'd be fucking awesome. And so I immediately drove home, got a change of clothes, and then drove right to the airport, flew overnight, basically got to New York at like 5 a.m. on the 9th. They drove me right to the studio. I got into makeup. I got on the set. We did the thing. That's the video that's out there. You can go find that. And then immediately got out of makeup and then immediately got back in a car and immediately went back to the airport and flew all the way back to San Francisco. And then had to make sure that, like all the Dreamcast reviews were publishing properly and all of the, and make sure that all of that stuff was was getting done. And then I had to go pick up my own Dreamcast from the Toys R Us around the corner from the office, because I wasn't there in the morning to get it when they first opened. So I had to go get my Dreamcast in the afternoon. It was cool. I don't know. Like it was crazy, right? It was just like, cause I don't sleep well on planes. So it was kind of a lot. It was interesting to just like do all that stuff. And, but it was so in and out. It was so just like frantic from the moment I landed in New York to the moment I was taking off again. It was just like a handful of, it was like a few hours. It was just like boom, boom. And I was turned around and back on a plane. It was crazy from that perspective, but it was fun to do it. I don't know. It was funny. The main thing I remember about it is the Dreamcast breaking. So like the first run of Dreamcast games, there were some games that had an audio glitch. I believe it was the ones that Midway made. There was some, it would occasionally be this weird repeating audio glitch. And they had to issue new versions of those games. And so when you see those games, if they have like a fake sticker on them that says like new or, or whatever, like that's the revised version that doesn't have the audio glitch anymore. And of course, in the context of like live television, of course, that audio glitch starts happening. So as the segment is ending, you just hear this like, and that's hilarious. I still have that FUBU jersey somewhere. And, yeah, I don't know. I was, and someone from Sega was there too. And so like I was kind of the independent person to actually talk about it. But like I was also excited about the Dreamcast, so it wasn't like I was there to like the Sega guy was there to go like football good and me go this game bullshit, like it was not that sort of situation. The Dreamcast was cool. It was a cool system. But it's a very dumb segment also. Like it's a very like, oh boy. Like the part where I say like how many more moves? And I'm like, oh yeah, you can hold a lot more moves on these discs or whatever the fucking insane shit. It's hard to talk, and it's less hard now in some ways, I guess, depending on what you're talking about. But it is this situation where you are trying to talk about video games in a very base level way to someone who doesn't know anything at all about them. And you're suddenly out on a limb talking about what makes this console better than the previous ones. And you're like, well, I mean, there's like fucking these games run at 60 hertz. These games run, like it's the resolution's improved. And so you can see these like there's a lot of jargon and stuff you could dip into there, but you can't because they're going to go like, what? And the whole point is for you to say like, well, yay, it's good. It's better. Condensation on the players. It's nice. More moves. GD-ROM hold more stuff. Another Dreamcast question. I don't know, Nick from Indy writes in and says, you're the only person I've ever heard talk about one of the 4 or 5 Dreamcast games I owned, Pen Triicelon. So what the fuck was up with that game? Okay, we'll take these questions in order. Yes, Pen Triicelon is a mask. It's like a kart racer. It's like a Mario Kart, but you're a penguin who kind of slides on your stomach a little bit, and there's some walking in there too. That's really bad. It's not a great game. It's not a great game. It's not a great game. Also, how common is it for games to have a different name in the US versus the EU or Japan? I remember TNN Hardcore Heat being called Buggy Heat, and a few other games names being shortened, but outside of Resident Evil / Biohazard, I can't think of any big franchises that have differing names. Well, so yeah, so it happens way less now than it used to, but I mean, Dragon Quest was Dragon Warrior here. yeah, the Yakuza games were, those were always called Like a Dragon in Japan. Bully was called something else in Europe, I think. The Castlevania games have a different name in Japan. But these days, I think when people are, coming up with their names and they're coming up with their what they're going to copyright and all of this sort of stuff, I think a lot more developers are thinking worldwide when they're coming up with that stuff. And so I think you have fewer instances of names being completely different. Crackdown is, what is it? It's Riot Act in Japan. I bought a Japanese copy of Riot Act because I thought the name was cool. But that just doesn't happen as often because frequently developers are thinking about what they're going to have their games be named around the world so that they don't have to do that. And so it just doesn't happen as much anymore. Colton from Fort Worth writes in and says, what would you want to see from Borderlands 4? To me, that series is at a crossroads. Yeah, I want the writing to be actually funny. Like, I think that game should go for humor. I think, making it super dry and stodgy would be a mistake, but I want that game to actually be funny. That would be my main thing. The thing I used to always think that I wanted out of a Borderlands game was the old Border Worlds concept, right? Of this should be an MMO. This should be, you could easily see a world in which Borderlands is much more of a live service game, if not a full on I want Hellgate London, but different, right? I don't know. But speaking of which, Bill Roper is back in the news. With a studio that they have gone out and gotten the rights to Hellgate London, and they intend to make a new Hellgate London, which is wild. Borderlands, better character customization. You just a create a character. I always thought that game needed armor instead of shields, so you could have a different physical look, of physical differentiation between different versions of a character, instead of just this one's the red one. You got the different skin for this guy. I always felt Borderlands would do better with a full character creator or just something better to better differentiate the look of your character, especially as you are growing in power. When you get the pauldrons, you want to put on the pauldrons. In World of Warcraft, you want to see the fucking pauldrons. You want to see the big spikes coming out of them when you are looking at your World of Warcraft character. So I think that was what I always thought I wanted in Borderlands. These days I'm a little less certain about all of that stuff, just because at this point, better writing and a better character. I don't know. I feel like the character customization, a lot of the skill trees have been really boring through most of the games, through most of the last few games. And they tried to do the thing where you're earning your points and you're speccing your character in a direction, and then you're getting your badass points or whatever the fuck it is. And, there's just stuff about the character builds and that I just don't find entertaining. And it's why I say Roland is still the best fucking Borderlands character, but that was before they did it. I don't know, better customization across the board, probably. Someone wrote in and said, I talked about that AEW Idol game from the studio that made all of those. I don't know, this is weird gossip and it's sort of a weird thing. I'm going to leave I'll leave some names out of this one, but basically someone wrote in to say that working at that developer fucking sucked. And says, everyone I know who worked there walked away with PTSD. East Side Games is the name of the studio that makes those games. The Office, they did the Trailer Park Boys one, all this other stuff. Everyone I know who worked there has walked away with PTSD, including me. What a terrible, miserable place to work. that gets wanked off by every other company pretending to be progressive, fun workplace. Fuck that place, and especially fuck, and then there's a person's name here. There was a job posting that made the rounds a while ago about some deranged C-suite guy looking for an assistant and basically expecting them to do anything and everything for them. I can't find it anymore, but it was that guy. Like, okay. All right. No location beef. We're going to start studio beef on this podcast. Alex from Wisconsin writes in and says, it's hard to understate the importance of Halo as the killer app for the original PlayStation. Without it, do you think the platform would have done well enough for Microsoft to stay in the console game? Would Xbox Live without a Halo have given the console enough momentum? I think Halo 2 is where it all fit, right? Because that's when Xbox Live actually existed and you could play it online. Halo 1 was LAN only. So I'll say at the time, the original Halo didn't really do much for me. Primarily because it didn't have real online play. That was the kind of the big problem. Like Microsoft had spent a lot of time talking about things like, hey, we've got an Ethernet port right on the console, so you're ready to get online. Like that was before the Xbox even came out. They spent a lot of time talking about that fucking Ethernet port and how every console is going to have a hard drive and every console is going to have an Ethernet port, and developers will be able to take advantage of all of that and get on the internet. Like, okay, cool. And then at some point, you realize that like, oh, like none of that shit works at launch. Like none of that online stuff that they've been talking about for months is actually there. Like why? And so when Halo came out and it was like, oh, do you want to play this on a LAN? I'm like, not really. I have a PC. I'm online playing video games all the fucking time. Like I don't want to have a fucking LAN party with a console game. What are you talking about? No, no. What? No. Fuck no, man. And so people in college, I feel like people that were in college during those years have like amazing stories about Halo 1. And I remember, because we worked in an office that had a LAN, like, naturally we did play some Halo, but it didn't stick. Like, I don't know that we spent our time playing Halo 1 there for a bit when we needed to, because someone was reviewing the game and we wanted to try it all out and do this stuff. But it was really a feeling of just like, okay, yeah, all right, we're good. And I think everyone went back to playing proper shooters on the PC. So I look at it as Halo 2 being the thing that actually matters, because that was, Xbox Live existed at that point. We had games that were actually taking advantage of that port in the way that they said it would, as opposed to all this LAN stuff. But at launch, Halo was pretty much the only game that stuck out. Like the launch of the Xbox was not some like amazing landmark moment. It was cool that Microsoft was in the console business, and it was cool that they got it out. And it was cool that the games ran as well as they did, because a lot of the stuff they were showing pre-release, like optimization, came very late. And like there was a lot of hand-wringing and worry about Halo 1. Because every time they showed it off, it was like, this just doesn't run right. This doesn't seem like, I don't know, man. I don't know if they're going to get it there. And then by the time Halo 1 came out, it was fine. On that specific front. But like the Xbox came out, and then like what was it, like the GameCube was like a week later or something, right? That was how that generation went down. Like the PlayStation 2 had been out for a while, and the Xbox came out. Like the Xbox games were just weird. It was like a bunch of franchises you would never heard of. It was a bunch of new shit, and like Dead or Alive 3. And so it was like, okay, what do we got here? We got Halo, we got Fusion Frenzy, we got Blood Wake. What was Blood Wake launch? Azaric. Yeah, Project Gotham Racing, which, you know, those guys had made that style of driving game previously on the Dreamcast, and so you were like, oh, that's cool that they're making one over here now. But, you know, like Mad Dash Racing, I remember that being a pretty early Xbox game. I'd have to go look at, like, let's go look. We got time. Original Xbox launch lineup. So it was just sort of a weird, I don't know, it was kind of a funky launch because it was a bunch of stuff that you weren't really always aware of. So here we go. November 15th, 2001. 4x4 Evo 2, Air Force Delta Storm, Arctic Thunder, Cell Damage, Dark Summit, which was that snowboarding game, Dead or Alive 3, Fusion Frenzy, Halo Combat Evolved, Mad Dash Racing, Madden 2002, NASCAR Heat 02, NASCAR Thunder 02, NHL Hits 02, Munch's Odyssey, Project Gotham Racing, Shrek, Test Drive Off-Road Wide Open, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X, and Trans World Surf. That's not an amazing lineup, you know? And so I think Cell Damage, yuck. Cell Damage was a car combat game that had cell shading, hence why it's called Cell Damage. Fusion Frenzy was a minigame collection. We all know about Fusion Frenzy. But in terms of like marquee games that were meant to sell you the Xbox, really on that list, it's Halo. And it's Dead or Alive 3, which is kind of the one game I was probably excited about. Well, no, Tony Hawk 2X was cool. But Tony Hawk 2X also didn't feel like... I remember the talk about what Tony Hawk 2X was going to be pre-release, making it sound a lot cooler than that game ended up being, in terms of like blending the levels together in a much bigger way. And it ended up just being this weird game with like the bonus levels are just kind of yucky. Or just the bonus levels being kind of, I don't know, half-assed isn't the word, but they didn't feel like real levels. Treyarch did that port, I think. And so the Xbox launch, yeah, I don't know. Like you have Halo and that's it. You don't even have Bloodwake, man. You don't even have Bloodwake. So what are we even doing here? Dark Summit, I remember. Dark Summit is on this list, but for some reason in my head, I keep thinking that Dark Summit was canceled. Okay, no, it came out. THQ, Radical Entertainment. But also, like, this generation was where everything lined up and everything kind of homogenized. Because we had the GameCube with the PS2 and we had the Xbox. And so you end up, like, the general situation there was always, hey, the Xbox version technically looks the best, but no one cares. The GameCube version oftentimes looks better than the PlayStation 2 versions, but the FMVs look like shit because the disc capacity sucks. And it usually wouldn't look quite as good as the Xbox version. And then you had the PlayStation 2 version, which was the one everyone played. Because the PlayStation 2 had been out for a while and, you know, had already had momentum and all of this other stuff. And so that was, you know, the GameCube mattered for its first party games and for a handful of other stuff like that, you know. But from a power perspective, the GameCube was sometimes weird, and sometimes you would get games that's like, this like image quality is better than PS2, but the frame rate is worse, or this looks fucked up, or this. It's like, here's this kind of like, it's mostly like the Xbox version, but doesn't run as well. And you're like, well, the Xbox version is much better looking, but also, I mean, look, personal preference, I guess, but like the Duke, the original Xbox controller, I think is like pales in comparison to the DualShock 2 in terms of just like overall playability of games. It's fine for games that were designed for it and so on and so forth. Like the Xbox controller is fine, but like it's a shitty place to play Tony Hawk. How about that? The Xbox controller is a shitty way to play Tony Hawk. And when they came out with the S controller, when they brought the S controller out in the US, it was better, but still not, I don't know. Like, I get the people like the original Xbox controller and stuff, but it's never, So the Japanese launch was kind of weird too. That happened in February of 2002. I was in Japan for that. Don't ask me why or nothing, but like, I don't know. I guess we went to Japan to cover the Japanese launch of the Xbox, or maybe, there used to be multiple trade shows a year in Japan. So it wasn't just that TGS. There would be an arcade show or something earlier in the year or whatever. So maybe we were over there specifically to cover a different trade show, and it just so happened that the Japanese Xbox launch was happening too. So they had events. Like I was there, like Bill Gates was there to give an Xbox to a person, and we saw that. But the lineup is a little different. Air Force Delta Storm, Amped, Dead or Alive 3, ESPN International Winter Sports, ESPN Winter X Games Snowboarding, Onimusha, Nobunaga no Yabo Ranseiki. This is like just a Nobunaga's Ambition game. Project Gotham Racing, Silent Hill 2, Sneakers. That's that game with the mice. Tony Hawk 2X, Transworld Surf, and Reckless, the Yakuza Missions, which is a driving game. The original Xbox launch was not. It didn't seem like some big deal. It came out and it was a big deal that Microsoft was getting into the console business, and it was a big deal that they had pulled it off largely. Like you looked at it and go like, this is a very capable console. This is a very playable console. Like you did it. And when the games look better, they look better. And you go, wow, okay, your HD functionality here in terms of component cables and 720, like that's cool. It felt forward looking in a way that the other consoles did not. But games so rarely took advantage of that forward looking nature because the PlayStation 2 was the sales leader. And so it was that same old situation we see all the time now, where everyone just codes to the lowest common denominator and then they do what they can, right? They're like, well, we have to make sure our PlayStation 2 version looks great because that's going to be the version everyone plays. And then you take some time to make that Xbox version look better. But insofar as it doesn't take away from us developing the PS2 version, and someone else ports it, or they just, they make it look a little bit better. But like it was always the case with the games that were exclusively made for the Xbox, you always looked at them and like, wow, like these games look like a step ahead of a lot of these third-party games. It's because the third parties didn't put in the work in a lot of cases to fully take advantage of the Xbox. That's my impression of it. I don't want to say that like, oh, these fucking, whatever. But like the impression was that like the PlayStation 2 was the focus, and the other consoles probably suffered visually a little bit as a result of that. I hope that answers your question, Alex. We have an anonymous email here. I'm thinking about picking up an analog pocket for its cycle accuracy, low latency, and my growing frustration with spending more time tweaking RetroArch settings than playing games. I've considered building a Mister, but the pocket is cheaper and gives you portability. Currently, I'm using a Steam Deck. A while back, you discussed your paradigm shift regarding FPGA, concluding that it may not be the end-all be-all. Do you still feel this way? Is the pocket right for me? So I like the flexibility of the Mister. For the same reason I don't want a handheld Xbox, I think the analog pocket is pretty limited. It does allow for external development, and people have brought a lot of additional games and arcade cores and all that other stuff to the analog pocket. I believe you can play Galaga 88 on it now. If you are coming over from a Steam Deck, the number of playable games on an analog pocket is significantly lower overall. than the things you could play on a Steam Deck. So, you know, you're not going to play PlayStation games on an Analog Pocket. You can play them on a Mister, and you can play them quite well on a Steam Deck as well. A Steam Deck can also play PlayStation 2 games quite well, and so, you know, hey, and Dreamcast games and so on and so forth. The Analog Pocket, I'm not really interested in keeping my cartridges around. And so the kind of the reason they built it was to put real cartridges in it. And now that they've done the open development, the open FPGA stuff that they're not supporting in any of their future devices, you know, developers, mostly developers that have made cores for the Mister, have ported a lot of that work over to the Analog Pocket where they can. And it's okay. You can play Outrun on an Analog Pocket, but you have to use the D-pad because it doesn't have any analog controls. But that's still kind of neat that you can do it at all. But yeah, I don't know. The Analog Pocket is well made for what it is. If you have a lot of cartridges and you want to buy the adapter sets, those things are going back in stock on the 5th, by the way. If you're thinking about buying an Analog Pocket, I just did get an email saying that that those things are going to go back in stock later this week. So now's the time. And I'm considering buying I'm considering buying their cartridge adapter sets just so I have one more device that, you know, if I find cartridges in the garage, you know, that I can test them and see if they work and all of that. You can get the dock for the Analog Pocket and dock it up and use different controllers and stuff like that as well, which, you know, may have some appeal depending on your use case. But like, yeah, I don't know. I have gotten barely any use out of my Analog Pocket. I bought it as a curiosity. I was just like, I want to see this thing, and I'm curious enough about it to want to know more. And they were in stock, and so it was like this easy, just like moment of just like, oh yeah. And I got one and messed with it for a little bit. Found the update script that installs all the external cores and everything, and ran all that, and I was like, yeah, okay, neat. And then that was kind of that, you know. The Analog Pocket seems like it is best suited for people who want to play those portable games on that device, and it's not more of a general purpose device the way a Mister is, and certainly the way a Steam Deck can be. I think the FPGA nature of things is really cool. For me, the spell was actually broken the first time I got my hands on an analog device when they sent their FPGA SNES out for a review. Like, I think I had it in my head that it was like, okay, well, the idea behind the FPGA is that you're recreating the chips as they exactly existed on the actual hardware. And so you're going to have the exact experience that you had on real hardware. And we got it in, and like, I think it was Mortal Kombat 1 or Mortal Kombat 2. I don't remember which. Didn't work on it. And I was like, wait, what? Well, why doesn't, and they issued a firmware update, and they said, oh, this firmware update will fix that problem you were having. I'm like, oh. Because I would think like, oh, well, if you're just making these perfect recreations of these chips, then all the games will work, right? It'll work just like a real SNES. It'll work just like the real thing. And you're like, oh, okay. So there's still a lot of work. It was this realization of just like, oh, there's way more to it than just recreating the chips and being super cycle accurate and all of this. So it kind of just shot holes in a lot of the claims of the FPGA stuff for me right out of the gate, especially the way Analog likes to make those claims. Because Analog it's very like chest out about like, this is not emulation. And this is, you know, and you're like, okay, yeah, cool. I mean, like, it's awesome. Like, but it's still, you know, there are still people in the middle of this. There's still potential for issues. There's still potential, you know, they for all of their devices, they have had to issue firmware updates and do all of that stuff. And you're like, yeah, okay, yeah. So it's not, I guess, with that in mind, it is not as freewheeling and like, this is perfect out of the gate every time. And watching the Mister And watching those cores get developed, I think has given me like somewhat more insight into the process. Like I don't code any of this stuff. I have compiled cores before, back before they were automatically compiling nightlies and doing all that stuff. I definitely compiled some of my own. But it's this realization of just like, oh, well, a lot of this stuff is like people chipping away at bugs and doing this stuff. And in some cases, developers have used software emulators as like blueprints for what they're developing. Like MAME is proven invaluable in a lot of core development and stuff because they've cataloged a lot of stuff and gotten the vast majority of it right, as I understand it. Nothing's perfect, but like, I think like all of that in mind, I think it can be better and lower latency and cooler than software emulation is on a Steam Deck or some of these other devices. Like FPGAs are fucking neat. It's cool that it does it. It's awesome that it works. When it works super well. Like I was streaming Guitar Freaks on the Mister running on the PlayStation Core, and how low latency everything felt, and how, I was able to play the game on an HDMI screen and all of that. That's awesome. That's not something you'd be able to easily do with a Raspberry Pi plugged into a fucking TV, right? And so I think that stuff is really awesome. But like, it's not like sometimes it gets sold to you as like it is identical to the real thing. And you're like, yeah, as long as it's developed right, as long as it's, as long as you did the work to develop it, that doesn't come for free. There's a lot of work that goes into making that happen. And even the commercial projects from Analog don't always get it right out of the gate. You expect it with a hobbyist thing, like like the Mister, with it being open source and everything. You're like, okay, yeah. Like watching the Saturn core come together over the last year and change. And it still has a ways to go, but watching it get to where it's gotten to, you're like, fuck, this is awesome. And how quickly the PlayStation stuff came together. Like it's mind blowing, but it's a process, right? Not unlike watching a software emulator come together. It's just, different. Let's see here. Josh from Michigan writes in and says, September of this year will mark 10 years since the release of Destiny, which is the end of the much quoted 10-year plan of content and development. So, is Destiny as a franchise where you thought it would be in 2014? Jesus Christ. Oh, man. Time is scary. Destiny still feels new to me in a lot of ways. Destiny still feels like a recent game. And so the idea that it is now a decade old is fucked. Is Destiny as a franchise where you thought it would be in 2014? Yeah, kinda. I don't know. I think it's, I remember being disappointed with Destiny 1 at launch. I think a lot of people were. I remember that demo for Destiny. I remember playing that demo they put out ahead of launch and being like, this is awesome. I can't wait to play way more of that. And then like immediately kind of hearing like, actually, that's like, there's like fucking 3 locations in the game, or like you kind of just saw a lot of the game. And being like, oh, huh. Fuck. Okay. That's less good. Good bones, but needs more content. And they kind of never, I don't know. Like Destiny went down the road that a lot of these games do, and Destiny, I think, went down there a lot harder, where Destiny became a game for sickos real fast. When they started having multiple raids and, like, it felt like a game that was being led by someone who was a massive World of Warcraft fan and wanted to try to capture some of the feeling that WoW would give you in those massive moments. in the context of a, 3-player cooperative first-person shooter. And I think they did that right. I think those raids in that game are fucking incredible. Like there's just like a lot of there isn't a lot of content like that out there, especially outside of like traditional MMO development. Like you don't see that style of raid in a lot of other things, and it's fucking cool. It's a lot though. You have to climb a mountain for that. You have to work together with players in a way that other games never require you to do. You have to attune for the raid in ways that games fucking don't do anymore. Like there's and over the years you get the impression that maybe they bred some of that out of the game to make it a little bit friendlier, but not really. And so I think the frustrating thing for me when it comes to Destiny is I like Destiny, but I am not in a position to see Destiny's best content. And I think that is maybe the problem with Destiny, is that the number of players that will actually see the coolest shit, is a pretty low number. And for the rest of us, a new season comes out and you fire it up, or a new expansion comes out, they throw you into a mission right away, and you're like, oh, what? Wait. And you go and you play it, and you're like, this looks great, and this shooting feels pretty good, and the numbers are going up again because they've raised all the caps on everything. Destiny's back, baby. And then you play it for a little bit and you go, all right, cool. I'm good. And then they vaulted some content and put some of it in, they took some content out of the game that, which is not awesome. But like ultimately, yeah, I think that, the stuff I can do in Destiny as someone who is not part of I'm not playing with a bunch of people who are at my level, or, like it's people that would level way past me and then be like, oh, I guess I gotta, if I'm going to do the raid, I got to fucking spend the entire weekend playing Destiny in hopes of catching up. Oh, I didn't quite get there. I'm going to be a little low level for the raid, but I guess we're going to do it anyway. Like those sorts of situations are bad. Are bad for approachability. But I think the players that are like super deep into Destiny, now, I think for players that are into Destiny enough to have those experiences, they're having experiences that don't really exist in very many other types of games. And that makes me ever so slightly jealous of them. That said, it seems like the people who hate Destiny the most are the people that play Destiny the most. And so maybe that's a double-edged sword on their part. So I don't know. I where did I think Destiny would get to over 10 years? I think back to, I feel like Destiny never made good on its original pitch to journalists. When we went to Bungie and we sat and we heard the pitch on what Destiny was going to be. And that's the every gun has a story pitch. It's the like, oh, where'd you get this gun? Like, oh, we were coming over this and doing, like we had to put all this together, and the chips were down, and we had, that you're gonna have the player driven stories about a weapon, and that you're gonna see that weapon and know that player must have done something great or must have done something. Like, no, man. They did the exotic quest and they did it 20 times waiting for the drop to happen, or they fucking traded in some strange coins or one of the other 35 types of currencies in Destiny 2 these days. They ran over to the gold pile and activated it, then activated a hammer, and then they ran downstairs and talked to a ghost, and then they went over to this thing. Like, Destiny is fucking, like, I don't even know where to go, and they've added signposts to make it easier to get around. And it's just like, well, I don't know, like, okay, you gave me a different ship, like it was the fucking Marvel Avengers ship. So is that just so I don't have to go to town? I like going to town. Town isn't the problem. Instead, you put me on this ship and I'm like, where the fuck is anything? What am I even doing? Every season is exactly the same, but with a different type of currency and a different kiosk I have to run up to activate said currency. That's the stuff that you just go like, yeah, man, I feel like I understand why a game might have to go in that direction. Like, just from a reasonable, development standpoint and all that other shit. But Um, they never made good on the idea of like this gun matters. Like, oh, what'd you do to get that gun? Oh, the guy was up in a tree selling it last Saturday, and I Googled it, and it said the man was up in the tree. I went to whereisthedestinyman.biz, and it said the man was up in the tree, and that here's what he was selling. And so I went and I spent my coins on that gun, and then yeah, that's how I got it. The tree man was in the tree. Sometimes he's not in the tree. Sometimes he's in a cave. He's behind a thing. That fucker moves, man. It's a good thing 30 websites sprung up. There are probably still video game websites in this age of SEO-driven guide bullshit. Someone is still running like a fucking weekly story about here's where Zur is and here's what he's selling. That was, if you want to know, that's probably where it happened, right? Was that the first time? Was that where fucking video game websites broke for real? Was the rise of stories every fucking Friday? Here's where Zur is, and here's what Zur is selling. Pathetic. And now Kotaku's going to pivot to guides. there's a point A to point B on that thing of like sad fucking pathetic business decisions, garbage fucking websites, and people who want to make their websites more garbage like by chasing after fucking guide SEO. Jesus Christ. It's a sad state of affairs. But I don't have another 3 hours to fucking complain about that. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I don't think Destiny made good on some of those original pitches, but at the same time, I think that, I have had great times with Destiny over the years, and I wish that I had more. I wish that like different aspects of Destiny were a little bit more accessible at a somewhat more casual level, and that the game was better about like pointing you, like even with the improvements they made, pointing you in the right direction of like, here's where the cool shit is now. Because now, there are 9 different seasons that I haven't finished. And so it's like, there are like, every time I log into Destiny 2, I end up doing a thing that's like somehow like a year old because I happen upon that quest first. And it's like, oh, I guess I'm doing this. And it's like, oh, this isn't the new thing that just launched this week. I'm off doing like, oh, I'm with the Sun guys I'm doing pyramid shit over here. We're not doing pyramid shit now. We're doing cave stuff. Oh, well, this pyramid shit was fun. I don't know. I had a good time for the 2 hours I played it this season. So cool. I don't know. It's both better and worse than I thought it would be, I guess. I really do like Destiny in a lot of ways, but I hit a point with it, I think last year, was when they put in the vines thing. Like when they rolled out, they're like, here's the you can fucking grapple places. That's where I finally broke loose of it, and I was just like, I don't want to fucking do any of this shit. And I reinstalled Destiny recently because I bought a bigger hard drive, and so I could afford to just keep it installed. And I fired it up a couple weeks ago and shot some guys, and I was like, I'm achieving nothing by shooting these guys. But I also don't want to run and do a quest right now either, so fuck it. Like, I went to the tower and picked up like clan rewards because I'm still in a clan. Just went like, all right, that's a gun. I don't know. Number looks like it's higher, so that's cool. Let's see here. Landon writes in and says, can you talk about how good Mercenaries 1 was? Fuck, what a good game. The lack of pandemic and volition in the modern gaming landscape makes me sad as shit. Yes. I didn't review Mercenaries 1 when it came out, so I didn't actually have a good read on just how fucking cool that game was. Like, I knew pre-release, I was like, oh, this looks like it's probably awesome. And then I didn't play it when it first came out, and so I ended up playing it later. I don't remember. I don't think it reviewed super well, right? because it's like clunky in some ways, but like Mercenaries 1 is neat because it makes good on a lot of that weird sandbox shit. And has like a cool hook and a cool world, and it was impressive in a lot of ways for its era. Also, fun fact here about Mercenaries 1 that I discovered on my own is if you have a modded Xbox and you copy Mercenaries 1 to the hard drive of your modded Xbox, there is a text file somewhere in that package that has like most of the values for like things like weapon damage and like how much damage you take and give and all this other shit. And you can just straight up edit the values how you see fit. It's a weird way to cheat in a game, but it's in there. And if you like just fucking breaking of, again, if you like breaking a game with cheats, which a lot of that era of open world game was some of the most fun games to cheat in, GTA and such, it was pretty fucking cool. And nuts that you could do that in a console game. It's the first time I'd ever seen that. So yeah, let's see here. Hey, here's a technical question for some of you out there. Joss writes in, sorry, and says, I listen to your podcast through Apple Podcasts on iOS sometimes, and I think you've got some distortion or clipping going on. It's hard to tell with audio. Not sure if this is just on the Apple app, but going from another podcast immediately to yours, it suddenly sounds like something is wrong with my headphones. To my ears, it sounds like distortion and is especially noticeable in louder sounds. I don't have the same issue with your YouTube videos, but again, it can be hard to tell. It's not unlistenable or anything, barely noticeable in a vacuum, just jarring coming from another source and a little distracting. So I want to know two things. Have you ever heard anything like that in this program, in the audio specifically? And have you heard it in the last 2 weeks of shows, meaning episodes, what is this? This is 95. So this one will count because I'll do this one this way too. But 94 and 93, because someone wrote to me on co-host and said that they were experiencing something that sounds a lot like this issue. And the only thing I can think of is that I typically export this podcast at 48,000 hertz, 48 kilohertz, I suppose. And so my thinking is that some people who might have devices like headsets or speakers or something like there's like cheap Bluetooth headphones or something like that might not be able to handle 48 kilohertz, that maybe they are experiencing some issues there. So the last 3 weeks, or last 2 weeks, but also this will be the third week today, I have been rendering the show out in 44.1 and busting it down to 44.1. And so I want to know if anyone has heard that at any point over the last couple of episodes, because I have made that change. Because I want, if that's the problem, I'll just start rendering it out at 44.1. It doesn't matter. I don't care. It's not that big of a deal. 44.1 is probably fine. Because also it's then compressed to like a 64 a 64 kbps MP3 in mono along with that. And so that shouldn't cause distortion at the upper end. That bit rate should be fine for a show that only features talking. But I don't know. So that's my technical question for anyone who has been experiencing that. I would love to track that down. I've heard it from, let's call it 3 people. But I have not been able to and this was the guess. I made that change over the last few shows, just as a guess that maybe that is the issue. But it shouldn't be specific to Apple. It should be anywhere you listen to the audio file, because all you're downloading the same file from every source. I don't upload a specific one for Apple or Spotify or wherever. They all pull from the same MP3. So that should all be fine. I'm curious about that. So if you have been hearing that sort of distortion in the show, write in and let me know, and also write in and let me know if you've heard it at all in the last, again, the back half of March, episodes 93, 4, and now 5. Because I'm curious about that. And that's going to do it for the show. Thanks everybody for hanging out. We'll be back next week with more podcasts. And we'll be streaming later this week as well. I don't know when Wednesday. I almost have I had to change USB sticks for that Atari 400 Mini. It wouldn't recognize the stick I was using, but I found one that works. I just need to format it and get more games onto it. So maybe we'll do something with that. That might be fun. And then Friday we'll rank some more. We'll rank some more video games of the 8-bit variety. So come on through. Head over to guard.bike to get to the YouTube channel and go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Or if you're watching on YouTube, go subscribe to the audio wherever audio podcasts live. It's on Spotify. If you're on the Patreon at patreon.com/Jeff Gerstmann, you can actually tie your Patreon credentials into Spotify, and it will give you the members feed for the show, the ad-free feed for the show that way, if you want to listen that way. And all that shit, y'all. Be back next week with another podcast. Take care. See ya.